The snow had erased the road, the fences, even the old names of things. But Cole Mercer saw the wheelchair tracks before he saw the people. An old man was pushing his wife through the storm with a mountain of belongings strapped to his back, and Cole's retired canine Atlas began to whine like he had recognized a battlefield no map could show. The storm came down over Sandpoint, Idaho with the slow patience of a door being closed by an old hand. Snow covered the pine boughs along Lakeshore Drive, softened the roofs of empty cabins, and turned the narrow road toward the northern ridge into a white ribbon with no edges. Cole Mercer drove with both hands on the wheel of his father's old pickup, shoulders squared beneath a gray parka that still smelled faintly of cedar smoke and gun oil, though he had not worn a uniform in nearly 2 years. Beside him, Atlas sat upright in the passenger seat, a 7-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat, a black saddle, and one scarred ear that tipped whenever the wind pushed against the truck. The dog wore his service vest because he refused to retire from responsibility, but he had managed, by some private legal argument of his own, to kick one snow boot halfway off. Cole noticed and said, "Leave it alone." Atlas looked out the windshield as if the comment had been addressed to a lesser creature. The boot slid another inch. Cole sighed. "You know, for a decorated military working dog, you have the dignity of a toddler at church." Atlas huffed through his nose, and for one thin second Cole almost smiled. Almost. Then the road curved, the lake disappeared behind a curtain of weather, and the past came back so quietly that it did not need to knock. Cole had come home to sell the cabin, sign papers, clear out the last boxes belonging to a father he had loved badly and forgiven late, then leave before the town had time to ask where he had been, what he had seen, and why he still woke up at 2:17 most nights with his hand around a knife that was no longer there. Sandpoint had always been good at remembering people in pieces. It remembered Cole as Caleb Mercer's angry son, the boy who fought behind the gym, stole peaches from the market, and once slept 3 nights in a boathouse because going home felt worse than freezing. It remembered his enlistment as a local success story, because small towns love a redeemed boy as long as he redeems himself somewhere else. It did not know much about the years after. Cole preferred it that way. There were things a man could explain, and things that would only become smaller, cheaper if he tried. Atlas knew enough. Atlas had been beside him under harder skies than this, had breathed against his ribs when the world tilted, had dragged him backward from the cliff edge of memory more times than any doctor or chaplain had managed. Now the dog was restless. Not restless the way he got when a storm pressed on his joints. This was different. His ears came forward, his body went still, then he gave one low whine. Cole slowed the truck. "What?" Atlas struck the window with his paw, not hard, but deliberate. Cole glanced toward the road shoulder and saw nothing but snowbrush and the pale blur of fence posts. "No!" Atlas whined again, sharper. He looked not at Cole, but through him, past him, toward a bend where the county stopped plowing, well, even in decent weather. Cole's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He had learned long ago to trust the dog when the dog used that voice. In the teams, men talked about instinct like it was lightning, sudden and mysterious, but Cole had come to believe instinct was just memory moving faster than language. Atlas remembered things. Bodies under dust, smoke before flame, fear under politeness. The truck crept forward another 30 yards, tires crunching over packed snow. At first, Cole saw only a dark shape swaying in the white. Then the shape separated into a man, a backpack, and a wheelchair. The old man was bent nearly double under a huge green backpack strapped high between his shoulders. The pack rose above his head like a second body, bundled with blankets, a cooking pot, a plastic bag tied with twine, and what looked like a framed photograph wrapped in a towel. Both his gloved hands gripped the handles of a wheelchair. In the chair sat an old woman wrapped in a red plaid shawl over a cream sweater. Her silver hair tucked under a knit hat, her lap covered by a quilt that had gone stiff with snow. The wheelchair wheels were half buried. Every few feet the front casters jammed, and the old man would lean his chest into the handles, boots slipping, breath coming in white bursts, until the chair lurched forward again. The woman kept one hand on the quilt, and one hand lifted slightly as if blessing the air or apologizing to it. They were not walking along the road. They were trying to survive it. Cole stopped the truck before he had decided to stop. His body moved with the clean obedience of training, shifting into park, hazard lights blinking, door open, cold hitting his face like a thrown sheet. Atlas crossed over the center console before Cole could clip the leash, launched into the snow and stood between the truck and the couple, alert but gentle. Atlas, heel. The dog obeyed halfway, which meant he came near enough to prove he had heard, and stayed far enough to make his opinion plain. The old man looked up. Snow clung to his white beard and the brim of his blue knit cap. His face was deeply lined, the color of weathered wood, and his eyes had the strained brightness of someone who had promised not to fall down until there was no one left watching. "We're fine," he called before Cole could speak. His voice was hoarse, stubborn, almost offended by rescue. "Road's public." Cole took 2 steps closer, boots sinking. "I didn't say it wasn't." "Then you can keep driving." The old woman in the chair coughed into her mitten, a small, dry cough that seemed to fold her inward. Atlas moved instantly, not rushing, just lowering his head and placing his warm muzzle near her hand. She looked at him and something softened in her face. "Well, hello there," she whispered. "Aren't you a serious gentleman?" Atlas thumped his tail once. Cole felt the sound more than heard it. The old man followed the dog's movement, and for a heartbeat his guarded expression broke. "Ruth," he said, half warning, half tenderness. "Don't charm the soldier's dog. We have enough trouble." The woman gave him a look sharp enough to cut twine. "Harold Whitaker, if trouble comes with fur and manners, I am keeping it." Cole stopped breathing for a second. Harold Whitaker, Ruth Whitaker. Names did not always hit like bullets. Sometimes they hit like a kitchen light left on in a house you thought had burned down. He saw not the road, but a little table covered in oilcloth. A bowl of beef stew pushed toward a 17-year-old boy pretending he was not hungry. Ruth's younger hand setting 2 biscuits beside it without comment. Harold's broad back in a doorway as Cole's father shouted somewhere outside, Harold saying, "Boy can sleep in the shop tonight, Caleb. Tomorrow you can be ashamed in daylight." Cole had not thought of that exact night in years. That was a lie. He had thought of it often and looked away. "Mr. Whitaker," he said. The old man's eyes narrowed against the snow. "Do I know you?" Cole pulled his hood back. The cold found the scar near his hairline, the one nobody in town would remember because he had earned it on another continent. "Cole Mercer." Ruth's hand flew to her chest. The cough took her again, and Harold leaned over the chair at once, all his sharpness turning into fear. "Ruthie." She waved him off, but kept staring at Cole. "Caleb's boy." Her voice had become very small. "Lord have mercy. You grew into your shoulders." Harold studied him, and recognition arrived slowly, unwillingly, like a man coming down a dangerous stair. "Cole." He did not smile. If anything, his jaw tightened. "You should get back in your truck. Storm's worsening." "So are you," Cole said. Harold's eyes flashed. There he was, the man from the memory, the one who could shame a drunk with 5 words and no raised voice. "We are managing. You are pushing a wheelchair through a snowstorm with half a house on your back." "It's not half a house." Ruth patted the quilt. "He left the ugly lamp," Harold muttered, "because no civilized person should carry that lamp twice." The line should not have been funny. It was ridiculous and cold and wrong, and yet it cracked something in the air. Cole heard himself exhale. Atlas, sensing a negotiation, sat directly in front of Ruth's chair, blocking progress with the full confidence of a federal injunction. Ruth looked down at him. "Your dog has voted." "He does that," Cole said, often without jurisdiction. Harold's mouth twitched, then flattened. We don't need charity. The words came out prepared, worn smooth from use. Cole recognized them. Pride had a sound, especially when fear was wearing it as a coat. Good, Cole said. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering transport before your wife gets sicker and before you put your hip into retirement with the rest of you. Ruth gave a soft, scandalized laugh. Harold glared. You always talk to elders like that. Only the ones I find trying to outwalk a blizzard. We're headed to St. Agnes Shelter. That's 8 miles. 6 if you cut across Old Mill Road. Old Mill Road is closed. Harold looked away. That was answer enough. Cole's gaze dropped to the backpack, to the papers tucked under a side strap. A corner of white showed through the plastic sleeve, black print wet at the edge. Eviction notice. The words sat there calmly, like they had not pushed 2 old people into weather that could swallow them. Cole felt the world narrow. In combat, anger could be useful for about 3 seconds. After that, it made men loud, careless, dead. He had spent years learning to put anger in a box and use the box as furniture. Now the lid lifted. Ruth followed his eyes and drew the quilt closer, not to hide from cold, but from humiliation. That small movement did more damage to Cole than shouting would have. He remembered Ruth Whitaker slipping a paper bag into his school locker with sandwiches inside. Remembered Harold pretending not to notice when Cole borrowed tools he did not know how to return. Remembered a winter coat appearing on the Mercer's porch with no note except a safety pin through the zipper. They had helped him the way good people help proud boys, quietly enough to leave them standing. And now they were here, in the snow, being asked by life to beg. Atlas rose and pressed his side against the wheelchair. Ruth's mitten settled on his head. He knows, she murmured. Dogs do, Harold said, but his voice had changed. Cole turned toward the truck. My cabin's 10 minutes from here. Stove works, roof probably works, coffee is terrible but technically legal. You can warm up there, make calls, figure out the next move when no one is losing fingers. Harold shook his head. No. Ruth said, yes. They looked at each other with the long-practiced fury of people who had loved each other through decades of bad weather. Harold's face tightened. Ruthie. Harold, my feet are numb. That ended it. Not loudly, not dramatically, just truth laid down in the snow. Harold closed his eyes, and for the first time Cole saw how tired he was. Not old, tired. There was a difference. Old was time, tired was weight. Cole stepped behind the chair. May I? Harold's hands stayed on the grips. I've got her, I know. Cole waited. Snow gathered on his eyelashes. Atlas leaned against Ruth's knee as if promising her the chair would not move without permission. At last Harold released one hand, then the other. The surrender was so small a stranger would have missed it. Cole did not. He took the handles and felt the chair's resistance the way the wheels dragged against hidden ice. Harold straightened under the backpack and nearly lost balance. Cole caught his elbow. Pack comes off. No. Mr. Whitaker, everything we need is in here. Then it rides in the truck like royalty. Ruth smiled faintly. Do packs get crowns? This one gets a seat belt if it behaves. Harold made a sound that might have been irritation or a laugh that had forgotten the route. He let Cole unbuckle the straps. The backpack dropped into Cole's arms with shocking weight. For a second, he understood the shape of the old man's last hour. Every step, every slip, every breath dragging that load and pushing the woman he loved because stopping meant admitting that the world had become stronger than him. Cole placed the pack in the truck bed under a tarp, then helped Ruth from the chair with careful, plain instructions, not pity. Hand on my shoulder. Atlas, stay. Good. On 3. She was lighter than he expected. That frightened him. Harold climbed into the back seat beside her, still watching Cole with suspicion, but one hand never leaving Ruth's sleeve. Atlas hopped in last and planted himself with his head on Ruth's lap. His missing boot finally came off and landed on the floor mat. "Traitor," Cole told him. Atlas closed his eyes. The cabin road was worse than Cole remembered, 2 ruts climbing through fir trees, the windshield wipers pushing snow aside in heavy arcs. No one spoke for the first mile. The heater rattled like a box of nails. Ruth's breathing steadied. Harold stared out the window, one hand gripping the strap of the rescued backpack. Cole saw him glance once at the dashboard at the old, cracked field watch resting in the cup holder. The watch had stopped at 2:17 years ago. Cole kept it anyway. Some men kept medals, some kept photographs. Cole kept the exact minute he learned that survival could feel like theft. Ruth noticed too. "That watch dead?" she asked. "Depends who you ask." Harold looked at him, then really looked. Maybe he saw the boy they had fed. Maybe he saw the man who had returned with quiet packed behind his eyes. "You home for good?" Cole watched the road. "No." The answer came too fast. Ruth's hand moved over Atlas's head. "Shame. Some houses don't like being empty." Cole did not answer. The cabin appeared between the trees, dark except for the porch light he had left on that morning. Snow stacked along the railing. The roof sagged a little but held. The chimney was cold, the windows black, the whole place looking less like a home than a memory waiting to be judged. Cole helped Ruth inside, set her near the hearth, and built a fire with movements that were more efficient than graceful. Harold tried to help, and was ordered into a chair by Ruth with such authority that even Atlas looked impressed. Soon, flames began to catch, cautious at first, then bright. The room filled with the smell of pine dust and old ash. Cole put water on the stove and found 2 cans of soup in a cabinet, both legal if no one read the date too closely. He opened them without comment. Ruth watched him move around the kitchen. "You still hate onions?" Cole paused with the spoon in his hand. "You remember that you picked them out of my stew and lined them up like evidence." Harold snorted. He was a sour little thing. "I was 17. "Exactly." Cole glanced at the old man. "You were taller then." Ruth laughed, and this time the sound warmed the cabin better than the fire. It did not last. Her cough returned, and Harold's hand went to her back, rubbing slow circles through the shawl. The fear in his face was naked for 1 second before he covered it. Cole saw it. Atlas saw it. The dog rose and stood by the wheelchair, eyes on Cole as if issuing the next order. "Do something." Cole ladled soup into bowls. "Tell me what happened." Harold looked into the fire. "Bad weather. No." Cole set the bowls down. "Bad weather doesn't put an eviction notice in a plastic sleeve." Ruth lowered her eyes. Harold's jaw flexed. For a while, only the fire spoke, clicking in the stove, settling into itself. Then Harold said, "People like us don't lose everything all at once. It leaves in errands. One paper to sign, one appointment missed, one neighbor who stops waving, one account you can't explain because someone smarter than you made sure of it." Ruth's fingers tightened in the quilt. "Harold," he asked, "and I am asking you to eat before you turn righteous on an empty stomach." Cole leaned back, surprised by the force in her voice. Harold obeyed. So did Cole. The soup tasted mostly of salt and apology. Atlas received no bacon because there was no bacon, and communicated the injustice with a sigh that belonged in court. Ruth broke first. "I kept the books for the St. Agnes Veterans Relief Fund. 31 years if you count the shoebox days before Samuel bought a computer and pretended it was progress. Small money mostly. Heating bills, groceries, a motel room now and then for somebody's son who came home wrong from war and needed one quiet night." Cole stared at his bowl. "A large amount went missing," Harold said. They said Ruth moved it. I did not. Ruth did not raise her voice. She did not need to. But my signature was on the new account forms, and the transfers had my authorization code, and I had been ill enough that some days came back to me in pieces. People believed what was tidy. Who accused you? Cole asked. Harold stared at the fire. Ruth whispered, Preston Vale's people found the discrepancy during the resort review. Ethan brought the papers. Sheriff said it looked bad. Pastor Samuel said we should cooperate. Everyone said if we stayed quiet, it might be handled gently. Her mouth trembled, then steadied. There was nothing gentle about being erased. Cole felt the cabin shrink around him. Preston Vale. Even he knew the name. A developer from Spokane with money in the new lake resort. Glossy signs along the highway, promises of jobs renewal, tax revenue. All the bright words that made old properties look like obstacles. Ethan. That name sat differently. Ethan Whitaker. Harold nodded once. My brother's grandson. Helped us after Ruth's stroke. Groceries, forms rides to appointments. I thought he was family. The last word came out like a tool breaking. Cole looked at the backpack by the door. And your house? Leanne, Harold said. Legal fees. Missed deadlines. Papers I didn't understand until understanding no longer mattered. Today was the last day. Ruth looked toward the window where snow pressed softly against the glass. We were going to the shelter. In this storm. Harold's eyes sharpened. It was our choice. Cole held his gaze. No. It was the only choice they left you. That's not the same thing. The room went quiet again. Not empty quiet, full quiet, the kind before a bridge gives way. Cole stood and crossed to the backpack. May I? Harold stiffened. No. Ruth said gently. Let him love. Harold's eyes filled with something furious and ashamed. He nodded. Cole opened the outer flap. Inside were pill bottles, socks, a Bible, a framed wedding photo wrapped in a towel, a dented coffee can, and a folder of papers sealed in plastic. He lifted the folder. Beneath it, half hidden in a side pocket, was an old photograph. The edges were curled. The image showed a skinny teenage boy in a borrowed winter coat standing beside Harold in front of a half-built porch. The boy's chin was lifted in practiced defiance. His eyes were hungry. Cole knew that face and hated how young it looked. On the back, in his father's uneven handwriting, were the words, If the boy makes it, tell him who paid the school fees. Cole sat down slowly. The room tilted, not from danger, but from memory rearranging furniture in his chest. What is this? Harold rubbed both hands over his face. Ruth's eyes shone. Your father had more shame than money. He wanted to pay us back one day. Cole could not look away from the photograph. You paid my fees? Some, Ruth said. A coat, boots, lunch account, driver's test, nothing grand. Harold grunted. Grand enough for a boy who kept pretending he wasn't cold. Cole's throat closed. He had spent his adult life believing he had escaped by force of will, by discipline, by rage turned into muscle. Yet here in a cabin he planned to sell sat the evidence that he had been carried too. Quietly, without ceremony, without ever being told because someone had understood that pride can be a young man's last blanket. Atlas came to him and pressed his head under Cole's hand. The dog's fur was warm, real. Cole gripped it. For a moment he was back at 217, kneeling in dust, hearing his friend's watch crack under a boot, learning that time could stop and still demand you keep moving. Then Ruth's voice reached him. Cole, dear, breathe. He did. Once. Badly. Then again. Harold looked away, giving him the mercy of not being watched. Outside, the storm thickened, covering the tire tracks, the wheelchair tracks, all evidence of how close two people had come to vanishing in plain sight. Cole set the photograph on the table face up. "You're staying here tonight." Harold opened his mouth. Cole lifted a hand. "Not charity, logistics." "That's a soldier word for charity." "It's a soldier word for nobody dies because Harold Whitaker wants to win an argument with weather." Ruth murmured, "I do enjoy him." Harold pointed at her. "You are not helping." Atlas placed one paw on the missing boot and pushed it under the chair as if hiding proof of his own rebellion. The absurdity broke the edge of the moment. Cole stood, fed the fire, and began clearing the couch. The old couple watched him, unsure whether to resist or surrender to warmth. He found blankets, checked the windows, put Ruth's medications beside a glass of water, and moved with a calm he did not feel. Inside, something had already shifted. He had come to Sandpoint to close a house. Instead, the storm had delivered two people who had once kept him from freezing in ways he had not known how to name. Before turning down the lamp, Cole picked up the eviction notice and read the county stamp, the signatures, the clean official language that made cruelty look like weather. At the bottom, beneath the legal paragraphs, a company name appeared in small print: Vale Mountain Holdings. Atlas gave a low sound from the hearth. Cole looked over. The dog was not asleep. His eyes were fixed on the door. Cole listened. At first he heard only wind and the soft cough of the fire. Then, beneath it, a faint engine sound moved somewhere down the cabin road and stopped. Harold heard it too. Ruth's hand tightened around the edge of her quilt. Cole turned off the lamp. Darkness filled the room, blue and silver from the snow outside. Atlas rose without command, silent now, every inch of him awake. Cole stood between the old couple and the door, one hand resting on the back of a chair, his voice low enough that only the room could hear. "Nobody moves." And outside, beyond the window, a pair of headlights blinked once through the trees and went black. Morning did not arrive in Sandpoint so much as pale through the storm. The cabin windows turned from black to pewter, the tree line emerged in pieces, and the world outside looked newly made, but not kinder. Snow lay heavy on the porch rail and banked against the lower steps. Every branch sagged beneath it. The lake was invisible beyond the pines, though Cole could feel its cold, open space the way a man can feel someone standing behind him in a dark room. He had slept in a chair near the front door with his boots on, which was not sleeping in any useful sense, and Atlas had spent the night moving between Ruth's wheelchair, Harold's borrowed armchair, and the window facing the cabin road. The headlights had not returned. Whoever had stopped below the trees had either left or decided waiting would do more work than knocking. Cole preferred enemies who knocked. Knocking gave shape to things. Waiting let fear put on costumes. At 2:17, as always, he had opened his eyes before the old field watch in the cup holder could accuse him. For several seconds, he had not known whether he was in Idaho or back in a concrete room under a foreign sky, hearing radio static that would never become the voice he wanted. Then Atlas had come out of the dark and rested his chin on Cole's knee, breathing slowly until the cabin came back. Pine walls, dying fire, Ruth's soft cough, Harold muttering in his sleep like a man still arguing with a receipt from 1989. Cole had put his hand on the dog's scarred ear and whispered, "I'm here." Atlas had accepted the statement with professional doubt. Now in the thin morning, Cole built the fire back up and found coffee in the pantry. The can had been open long enough to taste like old cardboard and regret, but it was coffee in the legal sense, and soldiers, sailors, widows, mechanics, pastors, and stubborn old men had survived worse. Ruth woke as he was pouring water into the dented pot. "If that is your father's coffee," she said from the couch, eyes still closed, "we should pray before and after." Cole looked over his shoulder. Good morning to you too. I am serious. Caleb brewed coffee like he was punishing beans for a crime. Harold opened one eye from the armchair. Woman, you drank it for 20 years. I loved your brother's son. I did not love his coffee. That distinction would have wounded him. Caleb was mostly wounded already. The words landed gently, not cruelly, and Cole felt the strange ache of hearing his father spoken of by people who had known him as more than a problem to solve or a ghost to pack away. Caleb Mercer had been a hard man, not because the world required it, but because he had mistaken hardness for shelter. Some nights he had loved Cole with clumsy sincerity. Other nights he had disappeared into a bottle and left the house feeling less like a home than a room rented by anger. Cole had spent years turning his father into one simple thing. Ruth, with one tired sentence, made him complicated again. That irritated him. It also felt true. Harold shifted, winced, and tried to stand. I need to get moving. Atlas lifted his head. Ruth opened both eyes. Cole set the pot on the stove. No. Harold glared at him. Wasn't a question. Mine wasn't either. Boy, I appreciate the fire. I appreciate the ride. But we don't live here. You don't live in a snowbank either. St. Agnes shelter opens at noon. Roads are closed. They'll clear. Not the Ridge Road. County scanner says 3 plows are down and the priority route is the highway. Harold stared. You listen to county scanners? Cole reached for mugs. When strangers park in my trees at night, I grow civic-minded. Ruth's smile disappeared. Someone was here. Cole did not answer quickly, and that was answer enough. Harold's hand went to the backpack beside his chair. Did you see who? No. Then don't build ghosts. I'm not building them. I'm checking the foundation. The coffee began to murmur. Atlas stood stretched and nosed the backpack with the concentration of a customs officer. Harold pulled it closer with his boot. Dog's got a habit. He's trained to notice what people guard. I'm guarding everything I own. That narrows it down. Ruth pushed herself higher against the pillow. Her face looked better than it had in the storm, but the bluish weariness under her eyes remained. Cole, there is more oatmeal in the side pocket if your pantry is as bachelor as your coffee. My pantry has soup. That is not a pantry. That is surrender. She pointed to the pack. Harold let him take out the oatmeal before you marry the bag. Harold muttered something about conspiracies formed before breakfast, but he unbuckled the flap. Cole found the oatmeal, a small tin of cinnamon medicine bottles, socks rolled with military precision, a Bible worn soft at the corners, and the dented coffee can he had seen the night before. Ruth watched his hand pause over it. Prayer, Ken, she said. Not money. Don't look so frightened. Cole lifted his hand away. Wasn't going to open it. Good. Half the prayers in there are none of your business. The other half are about Harold's driving. My driving is fine, Harold said. A mailbox jumped at me in 2004 and you built a theology around it. Cole poured coffee and let them bicker because the sound changed the cabin. It made it less like a holding position, more like a room where people might survive breakfast. He cooked oatmeal with too little confidence and too much water. Ruth ate it anyway, after adding cinnamon salt and a mercy she did not name. Harold drank the coffee black and made no complaint, which Cole understood as a sign that either the man had courage or his taste buds had retired. When the bowls were empty, Cole cleared the table and placed the folder of papers between them. I need the whole story. Ruth looked at Harold. Harold looked at the fire. Atlas placed himself under the table, his head on Cole's boot, as though anchoring him for whatever came next. Ruth spoke. Her voice was small but organized, the voice of a woman who had kept accounts for decades and still believed truth should balance if given enough columns. The St. Agnes Veterans Relief Fund began after the mill layoffs. Men came home from Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf, later Iraq and Afghanistan, and some of them came home with injuries you could see, and some came back carrying weather inside them. We paid heating bills, bought groceries, covered prescriptions when paperwork delayed, helped widows, helped sons and daughters. It was never rich money, but it was clean money. She folded her hands. I kept the books because I was good with details and because Pastor Samuel trusts too easily. That is one of his Christian gifts and one of his administrative failures. Harold grunted approval. 3 years ago, Ruth continued, the resort project began moving from talk to purchase. Preston Vale came to town with drawings, promises, and shoes too shiny for February. He said Sandpoint needed new life. Some of that was true. Young people leave when there is no work, buildings were empty, tax money was thin. A man who promises jobs can sound like a hymn if people are tired enough. Cole listened without interrupting. He knew men like Preston Vale. Not the same uniform, but the same posture. Men who spoke softly because other people had already arranged the room for them. Ruth sipped water. At the same time, Ethan started coming by more often. He is Harold's grandnephew, close enough to say family and distant enough to bill hourly. He had become a real estate agent, though he called himself a property consultant because that sounds less like measuring curtains. He helped with papers after my stroke. I had a small one. Nothing dramatic, praise God, but enough to make my right side unreliable and my memory spotty for a few months. Ethan drove me to appointments, brought Harold forms, set up online access for the fund because he said every charity needed modern systems. I hated it, Harold said. You hate microwaves, Ruth replied. Doesn't make them criminal. Jury's still out. The humor flickered and faded. Ruth looked down at her hands. Transfers began after the new account. Small at first, then larger. I questioned one of them, but Ethan said it was a vendor correction. Pastor Samuel said he was grateful Ethan understood computers. I was tired. I let myself be tired. The shame in her voice was quiet and undeserved. Cole felt anger stir again, but he held it still. Ruth did not need his outrage performing for her. She needed a witness. By spring, an internal review showed almost $48,000 missing. By summer, more. The papers had my authorization code, my signature, my notes, or what looked like my notes. Ethan looked stricken. Preston's auditor looked solemn. Pastor Samuel looked like someone had taken the floor out from under his faith. Sheriff Barlow came by with 2 deputies and said no one was accusing me formally yet, but it would be best if I cooperated. Harold's hands closed into fists on his knees. They treated her like she was already guilty. Some were kind, Ruth said, defending them by habit. Kindness without courage is just good manners, Harold said. That sentence stayed in the room. Cole wrote it down in his mind. It sounded like Harold, and like something he should have learned years ago. What happened to the money? Cole asked. I do not know, Ruth said. That is the worst part. I can defend every honest entry I made, but I cannot explain the false ones because I did not make them. When you cannot explain a lie, people mistake that for proof. And the house? Harold took over, voice rough. Legal fees ate us. We hired a lawyer from Coeur d'Alene for a bit, but he wanted retainers we couldn't keep paying. Then Ruth's medications went up. Insurance argued. We took a loan against the house to cover bills, thinking once the fund issue cleared, we'd be fine. It didn't clear. Ethan said he could help restructure the loan. Papers came. Deadlines came. I signed where he told me because Ruth was sick and I was scared. He looked at his hands. Big hands, gone thin knuckles, swollen from years of making and fixing. A man can build houses for 50 years and still lose his own because he can't read what another man hides in small print. Cole's jaw tightened. Who owns it now? Holding company, Harold said. Same office as Vale Mountain, if gossip is honest for once. Ruth looked toward the window where snow kept falling, as if the sky had no imagination. Yesterday the deputy came with final papers. We had 48 hours before but weather changed, and the shelter had a room if we could get there. Harold packed too much. Everything mattered, Harold said. Ruth's face softened. I know. Cole glanced at the backpack again. Everything mattered. A pot, a photograph, a Bible, a coffee can full of prayers. The full inventory of a life reduced to what one old man could carry while pushing the woman he loved through snow. There were scenes that made a man decide things before his mind caught up. This was one. Cole stood and walked to the window. The white yard gave nothing away. You should have called me. Harold barked a humorless laugh. We didn't know where you were. You could have asked around, Cole, Ruth said gently. You left to become someone who could survive. People like us don't tug on a man after he gets free. The sentence hit harder than accusation. Cole turned back. I wasn't free. Ruth studied him with those clear old eyes. She did not press. That was mercy again. He hated how much of it she had. A truck moved somewhere far below the ridge, engine muffled by snow. Atlas rose at once, ears forward. Cole lifted one finger and the dog froze. The sound passed. Maybe a plow, maybe not. Harold watched the exchange. You still live like war might call from the porch. Cole looked at him. Some days it does. Ruth reached for the coffee can and set it on the table. It made a small metal sound. Then maybe the porch needs better company. Nobody spoke after that for a while. The fire settled. The cabin smelled of smoke, wet wool, weak coffee, and cinnamon. Cole had spent years measuring rooms by exits. Ruth made him measure this one by what it held. That frightened him more than danger. He took out his phone and checked signal. 1 bar. Enough. I'm making calls. Harold stiffened. No lawyers. Not yet. No money. I wasn't offering. No news people. Agreed. And no pity. Cole met his eyes. I don't do pity well. Good. I do logistics. Ruth smiled. There's that soldier word again. Cole called Lena Ortiz first. She answered on the 5th ring with the voice of someone already suspicious. If this is about you pretending sleep is optional, I'm hanging up and driving over. Need a medical favor. Silence. Then the tone changed. Who is hurt? Elderly woman, respiratory trouble, wheelchair, exposure last night, stable now, needs evaluation when roads clear. Quietly. Name? Ruth Whitaker. Another silence, heavier. Oh, Cole. You know the story. Everyone knows a version. Most versions are cowardly. Can you come? When I can get chains on the tires. And Cole? Yeah. Do not turn this into a one-man war. He looked at Harold and Ruth, at Atlas, at the prayer can. Too late for one man. He ended the call before she could read him too accurately. Then he called Maggie Doyle's diner. Maggie answered with clatter behind her, probably a spatula striking a grill and someone complaining about toast. Her voice came fast. Doyle's, if you're asking whether we're open, define open. Door works, coffee's hot, cook's dramatic. Maggie, this is Cole Mercer, Caleb's boy. Well, I heard you were back. Your father still owes me $9 and an apology, but one of those debts died with him. What do you need? Cole almost smiled despite himself. Information. Dangerous breakfast. Harold and Ruth Whitaker are with me. The diner noise seemed to drop. Are they safe? For now. Thank the Lord. Her voice thickened, then sharpened. You listen to me, Cole Mercer. Those two got done dirty and half this town knows it in the part of the heart they don't talk from. You want the truth, you come to the diner when road's clear. And bring that dog I heard about. I trust dogs more than men who say development. Anyone asking about them? Ethan came in yesterday. Preston's assistant, too. Sheriff had pie and looked guilty, which is his winter face lately. Why? Cole looked toward the window. Someone stopped near the cabin last night. Maggie inhaled. Lock your doors. Also, if Harold says he doesn't need help, ignore him. He once finished a roofing job with a fever because he didn't want the shingles thinking he was weak. Understood. And Cole? Yes, ma'am. Ruth likes tea better than coffee. Your father never remembered. Cole looked at the old woman by the fire. I will. He hung up and found tea in the back of the cabinet, peppermint unopened. The expiration date was a historical document, but Ruth accepted it like a sacrament. By noon, the storm eased enough for gray light to settle over the yard. Lena arrived in a Subaru, wearing tire chains and the expression of a woman who had pulled grown men back from bad ideas for a living. She was 41, compact, dark-haired, and carried a medical bag like a weapon. Atlas greeted her with the solemn dignity he reserved for people who had earned rank. Sergeant Fuzzy, she said, scratching under his chin. Atlas forgave the nickname because Lena had once removed shrapnel from his shoulder and never mentioned that he cried less than Cole. She examined Ruth with careful warmth, listened to her lungs, checked her pulse, reviewed medications, and frowned in a way that made Harold grip the chair arms. She needs rest, warmth, fluids, and a real appointment when roads are clear. No more cross-country wheelchair expeditions. Ruth looked at Harold. You hear that? Doctor's orders. She's a nurse. A nurse with sense outranks a husband with a backpack. Lena looked at Cole. And you? When did you last sleep? Recently. That is not a time, it's a category. So is denial. Harold chuckled. Cole betrayed himself by glancing at the watch on the shelf. Lena saw it. Of course she did. Later, she said quietly, meaning they would talk when the room no longer needed him armored. After she left, Cole stepped onto the porch with Atlas. Snow squeaked under his boots. The air had cleared enough to show tire impressions at the lower edge of the drive, half filled but visible. A vehicle had stopped there in the night. Not a plow, too narrow. Cole crouched, photographed the tracks, and noticed something caught on a low branch near the turnaround, a strip of glossy black plastic, like the edge of a temporary dealer plate cover. He bagged it in an old envelope. Atlas sniffed the air, then the snow, then looked toward the road with a low rumble. Yeah, Cole said. I don't like it either. When he went back inside, Harold was pretending not to watch the door, and Ruth was turning the dented coffee can slowly in her lap. Cole set the envelope on the counter. Tomorrow, roads permitting, I go to Maggie's, then St. Agnes, then the county office. Harold's expression closed. Cole, no grand gestures. No press. No pity. I heard you. You also heard me say no war. Cole looked at Atlas, then at the old field watch, then at the photograph of his 17-year-old self lying on the table between soup bowls and legal papers. This isn't war. Ruth held his gaze. Then what is it? Cole thought of the road, the wheelchair tracks, the way snow erased evidence if no one cared enough to look before morning. A rescue, he said. Done slowly enough that nobody gets crushed by it. Harold looked down. Ruth's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Atlas came over, placed one paw on Cole's boot, and leaned his weight there, heavy and warm and inconvenient. Ruth smiled. He agrees. Cole scratched the dog's head. He thinks he is in command. Is he wrong? Harold asked. Cole looked at the German shepherd, at the missing boot still hidden under Ruth's chair, at the old couple sitting in the cabin he had intended to empty. For the first time since crossing into Idaho, he did not know how to leave. Outside at the end of the drive, a county snowplow crawled past without turning in. As it went by, something orange fluttered from the mailbox. Cole stepped out, pulled it free, and felt his pulse slow into something dangerous. It was not an official notice. It was a photograph printed from a phone taken through the cabin window sometime during the night. In it, Ruth slept by the fire. Harold sat beside her, and Cole stood in silhouette near the door. Across the bottom, someone had written in block letters, "Let old debts stay buried." By the next afternoon, the storm had loosened its fist, enough for the county to carve narrow lanes through the snow, though every roadside ditch remained soft and treacherous beneath its white cover. Sandpoint looked scrubbed clean from a distance, with smoke rising from chimneys and sunlight glancing off the lake in hard silver flashes, but Cole had learned early that clean surfaces often hid the oldest rot. He left Harold and Ruth at the cabin, with Lena checking in by phone 3 extra logs stacked by the hearth, and Atlas under strict instruction to stay. Atlas responded by placing himself beside the door, ears back offended to the roots of his lineage. Cole clipped the leash to the dog's vest anyway. "You heard me wrong," he said. "You're coming." Atlas immediately forgave him and trotted to the truck with the solemn bounce of a creature whose legal appeal had succeeded. Harold watched from the porch, wrapped in one of Caleb's old coats. "Don't go stirring up snakes." Cole opened the truck door. "It's winter. Snakes have friends." Ruth, seated just inside near the warmth, lifted one hand. "Bring back tea if Maggie has decent kind. And do not let him feed Atlas too much bacon." Harold looked wounded. "Why would you assume I planned that? Because you looked at the dog like a man about to commit hospitality." Atlas heard bacon, turned, and focused on Harold with immediate spiritual interest. Cole pointed at the passenger seat. "In." The dog obeyed, though not before glancing once at Ruth, as if promising a full report. The drive into town took 20 minutes, and several memories Cole did not invite. The old elementary school was now a storage building. The bait shop had become a kayak rental place with cheerful signs buried half in snow. The church steeple still rose above spruce trees, white paint peeling around the bell tower. And the diner still sat on Cedar Street with red vinyl booths visible through fogged windows. Doyle's Diner had been there since before Cole was born, and by local law or divine stubbornness, it smelled exactly the same: coffee, onions, pancake syrup, hot grease, damp wool, and conversations people pretended were private. A bell rang when Cole stepped inside. Every head turned. Some recognized him. Some recognized Atlas first and improved their posture without knowing why. Maggie Doyle stood behind the counter in a green sweater and an apron that read, "Kiss the Cook and Risk Your Life." She had red hair streaked with silver, a pencil behind one ear, and eyes that could warm a room or search it. The moment she saw Cole, her expression shifted from curiosity to decision. "Caleb's boy," she said. "You got tall and grim. Sit." "Good to see you too. It'll be good when I decide it is." Her gaze dropped. "And this must be Atlas." Atlas sat, tail sweeping once across the floor. Maggie pointed at him. "No begging." Atlas looked away, implying the accusation was beneath him. A man at the counter whispered something about veterans and dogs. Another man went quiet in the careful way people do when they know a story, but not whether they are allowed to speak it aloud. Cole chose a booth near the back, facing the door, by habit. Maggie brought coffee, then remembering herself, swapped it for tea with a grunt. "For Ruth, peppermint, new box. Don't tell her I charged you because I didn't." She said thank you in advance. "Of course she did. Woman has manners sharp enough to shave with." Maggie slid into the opposite seat without asking. "Now, tell me how bad." Cole placed the eviction notice, the photograph from the mailbox, and the black plastic strip on the table. He did not dramatize it. He had no taste for turning fear into theater. Maggie read, looked at the photo, and her mouth thinned. "Cowards. Who knew they were at my cabin? Half the county will know by supper. Snow carries gossip better than tires." Names. She leaned back, arms folded. "Ethan Whitaker came by yesterday morning asking if anyone had seen Harold and Ruth. Said he was worried. He did not look worried. He looked like a man hoping somebody would tell him where a lost wallet fell. Preston Vale does not do his own looking. He has assistants, lawyers, clipboard people. One of his project managers came in for coffee, and asked whether the old couple had made it to the shelter. Too casually. I told him I had no idea which was Christian because it was almost true. Cole glanced toward the counter. A sheriff's deputy sat 2 stools down, pretending interest in eggs. And Sheriff Barlow, Maggie followed his eyes. Tom used to be a decent man, with a spine made of average materials. Lately, he bends toward whoever funds the new communications tower. Preston donated half. You think Barlow is bought? I think bought is a simple word for complicated fear. His son has debts. His office needs money. Preston smiles like a bank loan. You do the math. Atlas, lying under the table, lifted his head. The diner bell rang again. Sheriff Tom Barlow entered in a brown uniform jacket dusted with snow, broad face reddened by cold, mustache trimmed too neatly, eyes moving first to Maggie, then Cole, then the papers on the table. Maggie murmured, "Speak of civic courage." Cole did not move the papers. Barlow walked over with the weary authority of a man hoping the room would make his choices for him. Cole Mercer. Sheriff, heard you were back. People keep telling me. Barlow's eyes dropped to Atlas. That dog safe in here? Atlas looked at him with devastating boredom. Maggie said, safer than most customers. A laugh moved around the diner and died quickly. Barlow did not sit. I also heard Harold and Ruth Whitaker are staying with you. They're warm. That's good, but this is a delicate matter. Cole took a sip of diner coffee and regretted it less than his own. Old people in a wheelchair in a blizzard tends to remove delicacy. Barlow's jaw worked. You know what I mean. There are legal proceedings, property matters, an ongoing financial complaint. Ongoing, Ruth said. Everyone decided she was guilty. No one decided anything. Maggie made a sound into her coffee. Barlow looked at her. Maggie. Tom, 1 word each, 30 years under them. Cole tapped the photograph from the mailbox. Someone came to my cabin at night and left this. Barlow picked it up, and for the briefest moment, something like alarm passed through his eyes. Could be kids. Kids with a long lens and an interest in old debts. I'm saying don't jump. I jumped out of a truck into snow because your town left 2 elderly people on the road. My jumping standards have changed. Barlow's face colored. Watch yourself. Atlas stood, not growling, just standing. The effect was immediate. Barlow took half a step back before pride stopped him. Cole put 2 fingers down, and Atlas sat again, eyes still on the sheriff. No threat, no display, just the old language of boundaries. Cole softened his voice, which somehow made it harder. I'm going to look into what happened to Ruth. I can do that quietly, or I can do it after people keep trying to scare her. Quietly is better for everyone. Barlow set the photograph down. You were always trouble. No. I was a boy people called trouble because it saved them asking why. The sheriff had no answer ready for that. Maggie's eyes flicked to Cole, approving but sad. Barlow pulled a card from his pocket. If you find something real, bring it to me. Will you read it? The room went still. Barlow placed the card on the table. Don't make me your enemy, Cole. I don't make enemies. I identify terrain. Barlow left without ordering. The bell rang behind him, cheerful and inappropriate. Maggie waited until the patrol SUV pulled away. Well, that went about as well as a pie and a dryer. Cole looked at her. Does that happen often? Not since my nephew was 12. Focus. She took a napkin and began writing names. You need Pastor Samuel. He has meeting records unless someone cleaned him out. You need Helen Price at the bank because she saw Ethan come in with Ruth's power of attorney papers after the stroke. She won't talk unless she thinks Ruth asked. You need Walt Kinney, plow driver, because he saw a black SUV near the Whitaker place the night before the first audit. And you need to know this. She paused. Her voice lowered. Harold and Ruth helped more people than you can count. Heating oil, rent, Christmas groceries, a bus ticket for my sister when her first husband got mean. They did it quietly, because Ruth believed dignity was part of the gift. When the accusation came, people should have stood up. Some wanted to. Most waited for somebody else to do it first. Cole looked around the diner. Several faces turned away too late. Shame sat on stools, ate toast, checked phones, pretended not to listen. He knew shame. Shame was not useless if it eventually grew legs. "Why didn't you?" he asked Maggie, not cruelly. Her eyes flashed, then filled. "I did some. Not enough. Preston owns the building my diner sits in through one of his companies. My lease renewal came due right when I started asking loud questions. Funny timing. I told myself staying open meant feeding folks, keeping jobs, being useful in other ways. Some of that was true. Some was fear wearing an apron." She looked down at her hands. "There. You wanted truth. It ain't flattering." Cole respected her more for saying it. Fear's normal. So is snow. Doesn't mean you lie down in it. They sat with that. Atlas, perhaps sensing the conversation needed mercy, slid his head onto Maggie's knee. She blinked, then scratched his ear. "You're a handsome old soldier, aren't you?" Atlas accepted this as overdue public policy. "He hates boots," Cole said. Maggie peered under the table. "I see one boot. The other is classified." She laughed. It cut the heaviness just enough. Cole gathered the napkin. "Where is Ethan's office?" 2 blocks over, next to the title company. Glass door, fake plant smell of cologne and moral mildew. Specific. I am a poet of commercial rot. Cole stood. "Thank you." Maggie gripped his wrist before he could leave. "Careful, Preston's not some cartoon villain twisting a mustache. He gives scholarships, pays hospital bills, sponsors the Christmas lights. That is why people defend him. He wraps the knife in a quilt." Cole nodded. "I know the type." Outside, the cold brightened his lungs. Atlas hopped into the truck reluctantly, having determined the diner contained bacon possibilities worth continued surveillance. Cole drove to Ethan Whitaker's office and parked across the street. The building had wide windows, a tasteful sign, and 2 luxury SUVs out front, both clean despite the weather. Inside, Ethan stood near a desk, speaking into a phone, one hand smoothing his blonde hair. He was 34, trim, polished, wearing a vest that suggested mountains without risking discomfort. He saw Cole through the glass and ended the call. Cole entered, with Atlas at his side. A receptionist looked up, smile fading. "Can I help you? Ethan Whitaker." Ethan came forward too quickly. "Cole Mercer, wow! I heard you were back. I would shake your hand, but—" He glanced at Atlas. "Is he friendly?" "Selective." Ethan laughed, then realized no one else had. "Right, well, I was worried about Uncle Harold and Aunt Ruth. Are they with you?" "Warm. Good, that's good. They've been under a lot of stress, Ruth especially. Her health, the confusion with the fund, it has been heartbreaking for everyone." Cole studied him. Ethan's eyes were earnest in the way polished brass is gold if you stand far enough back. Confusion. "You know what I mean. Tragic situation. Nobody wanted them out of the house, but when taxes, liens, and safety issues stack up, the county has procedures." "Who owns the house now?" Ethan's smile held. "That's a legal matter." "I like legal matters." "Do you?" Ethan's voice cooled. "Because from what I hear, you have been away a long time. Things change. Harold and Ruth are proud people, but pride doesn't make unpaid debt vanish." Atlas stepped forward and sniffed Ethan's right pant leg. Ethan stiffened. "Could you keep him back? He smells stress." "Then he must love you." There it was, a little flash of the real man under the customer service varnish. Cole smiled faintly. "Probably. He placed a copy of the mailbox photograph on Ethan's desk. Know anything about this? Ethan looked at it for less than a second. Too short. No. You didn't ask where it came from. I assume your cabin? Why? Ethan's throat moved. Because you said Harold and Ruth were warm. Where else would they be? Cole let silence stretch. Most people filled silence with mistakes. Ethan did. Look, Cole, I know you have some emotional connection to them. They helped you when you were a kid. That's admirable. But don't let nostalgia turn this into a crusade. Ruth made mistakes. Harold couldn't keep up. It happens. Getting them into assisted living might be the kindest outcome. Pushing them into a storm was kind. Nobody pushed them. They chose to leave. Cole's voice dropped. Choice requires a real alternative. Ethan's face tightened. You military guys always talk like life is a mission. This isn't overseas. You can't kick doors here. Cole leaned slightly closer. Good. I hate doors. For the first time, Ethan looked unsure. Atlas gave one quiet sneeze, unimpressed with the office air. Cole turned to leave, then stopped at the door. What cologne is that? Ethan blinked. Excuse me? Atlas is curious. It's just mint. Cedar, something. My girlfriend bought it. Nice. Cole walked out before Ethan could decide whether that meant anything. It did. Beneath the cologne was another scent, faint but familiar from the envelope in Cole's pocket. Coal plastic engine oil and peppermint tobacco, the kind that had lingered near the tire tracks below the cabin. It was not proof, it was a thread. Threads mattered. He returned to the truck and found a folded paper tucked under the windshield wiper. For 1 second his body went hot, then still. He scanned the street. People moved along sidewalks, a delivery driver, a woman with groceries, no obvious watcher. The paper held only 6 words. Ask Ruth about the missing notebook. At the cabin. Ruth read the note twice, her face draining of color. Harold stood behind her chair, both hands on the grips. What notebook? Cole asked. Ruth closed her eyes. I kept a private ledger, not official. Just my own notes. Questions. Odd transfers. Names. Dates. After the stroke, some memories blurred, so I wrote everything down. I thought it was lost. When, the week before they accused me, Harold whispered, you told me you misplaced it. I thought I had. Her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from a terrible new understanding. Cole, if someone took that notebook, then they knew I was close to seeing the pattern. Atlas moved to the window and stared into the dimming afternoon. Snow had begun again, softer now. The kind that did not announce danger, only covered it. Cole looked at the old couple, at the note, at the dog. Then we find out who had access. Ruth opened her eyes. Ethan did. Harold's face hardened with grief before anger arrived to save him from it. He sat at our table. I gave him coffee. Cole folded the note carefully. In the distance, a church bell began to ring, slow and low, though it was not the hour. Ruth turned toward the sound. St. Agnes, she whispered. The bell rang again. Then again. Not a call to service, a distress signal if anyone remembered the old code. Cole grabbed his coat. Atlas was already at the door. The bell at St. Agnes had not been used for emergencies in years, not officially, but old towns keep old languages under the floorboards. 3 slow rings meant fire once, back when half the houses were heated by wood stoves, and a man with a strong arm in the bell tower could save a block. 4 meant medical help. The pattern coming through the snowy afternoon was uneven, frantic, a human hand pulling at memory without knowing the grammar. Cole drove with headlights cutting a pale tunnel through the weather. Atlas braced beside him, Ruth's missing notebook beating in his thoughts like a second pulse. He left Harold and Ruth at the cabin after making Harold promise, under Ruth's supervision and Atlas's temporary glare, that he would lock the door and answer no one. Harold had objected. Ruth had ended the objection by saying, if you make me chase you in this chair, I will haunt you before I die. Harold locked the door. Now the church appeared at the edge of town, white steeples smudged by snow-stained glass windows, dark except for one yellow pane near the basement. 2 cars sat crooked in the lot. Maggie's old station wagon was one of them. Cole parked behind it and stepped out before the engine settled. Atlas hit the ground silently, all business now, no boot rebellion, no diner theatrics. The bell rang once more, then stopped. The silence after was worse. Cole moved to the side entrance and found Maggie banging on the basement door with a snow shovel. "It's stuck!" she snapped, breath fogging. "Samuel's down there. I heard glass break, then the bell. Door won't open." "Where's the main key?" "Inside with him." "Windows? One broken, too small for me. Maybe big enough for the dog if he had thumbs." Atlas looked at her, then at Cole, as if willing to discuss thumb policy later. Cole knelt by the basement door. The frame had shifted with ice, but the lock was engaged from the outside with a temporary hasp and a cheap padlock that did not belong to the church. Fresh scratches marked the metal. Not dramatic, not movie villain work, simple, ugly inconvenience designed to trap an old pastor in a cold basement long enough to scare him. Cole photographed it, then used bolt cutters from his truck. He did not make a production of it. One clean squeeze, metal giving way, door open. Cold, damp air rolled out, carrying dust, old paper, and the faint mineral smell of broken glass. "Pastor Samuel," Cole called. "Down here." A voice answered, strained but steady. "Careful, steps are slick." Cole descended with Atlas behind him and Maggie close enough to ignore instructions. Pastor Samuel Green sat on the bottom step, wrapped in a faded choir robe, one hand pressed to his forehead, spectacles crooked. He was 67, narrow-shouldered, with white hair, and the apologetic posture of a man who had spent too many years asking people to forgive one another before asking who had been harmed. Beside him lay a cardboard box of files, some spilled across the floor. Snow dusted the concrete beneath a broken basement window. Cole crouched. "You hurt pride, mostly. Head enough to make me feel foolish. I heard someone upstairs after Maggie left to fetch more boxes. Then the lights went. Then the door wouldn't open. I stumbled on the steps." Cole kept his voice calm. "Did you see who?" Samuel shook his head. "Only a coat through the glass, dark, maybe blue, maybe black. I am afraid my witness skills would not impress a jury." Maggie knelt beside him. "Your witness skills can impress me by not bleeding on choir robes." Cole glanced at her. She glared back. "Small cut," she said quickly, anticipating his concern. "YouTube safe soldier. Nobody needs the medical lecture." Despite himself, Cole almost laughed. Pastor Samuel blinked. "What?" "Nothing," Cole said. "Let's get you upstairs." They moved him slowly, no heroics, no roughness. Atlas stayed close to Samuel's knee, adjusting his pace with the instinct of a dog who understood weakness without insulting it. In the fellowship hall, Maggie made tea with the aggression of a battlefield commander. Cole checked the doors, windows, and breaker panel. Nothing obvious beyond the forced hasp and a disturbed file cabinet. That mattered. Whoever came had not intended to destroy everything. They had been looking for something specific. When Samuel was seated with a compress and his color returned, Cole placed Ruth's note on the table. "Someone told me to ask about a missing notebook. Then your bell rings. Coincidence?" Samuel looked older suddenly. "No." Maggie stopped stirring tea. "Samuel?" The pastor folded both hands around the mug. "Ruth came to me before the accusation became public. She was worried about transfers from the relief fund." "She had a private notebook, yes. She said the official reports did not match her own records, and she feared her illness had caused mistakes. I told her to rest. I told her we would sort it out." His voice thinned. "I wanted to believe it was a clerical issue, because that was easier than believing someone was stealing from people who had already paid enough." Cole sat across from him. What happened to the notebook? She brought it here for a finance committee meeting. Ethan was present. Preston Vale's auditor was present by invitation because the resort had pledged a donation to the fund. Sheriff Barlow stopped in near the end. I remember because Ruth said she felt dizzy and Ethan insisted on driving her home. The notebook was on the table. Later, it was gone. Who noticed? Ruth called the next day asking whether she had left it. I searched. I did not find it. Maggie set the spoon down too hard. And you never told anyone? Samuel closed his eyes. I told myself it was misplaced. Then the accusation came and everything moved so quickly. Lawyers, meetings, donors. Preston's people said public scandal would destroy the relief fund entirely. Ethan cried in my office and said he could not bear to see his family name dragged through court. Sheriff Barlow advised cooperation. He swallowed. I failed her. The room held that failure without softening it. Cole knew the temptation to make a confession feel like courage simply because it hurt to say. But truth spoken late still had to walk somewhere. Do you have records from that meeting? Samuel nodded toward the basement. Minutes, attendance sheet, copies of the account change authorization. Let's see them. Maggie helped Samuel remain seated by threatening him with soup, then followed Cole downstairs. Atlas went ahead, nose low, sniffing the steps, the broken glass, the file cabinet. Cole opened boxes one by one. The basement was the kind of place where institutions stored memory and hoped mice understood confidentiality. Old hymnals, tax receipts, youth group photos, casserole sign-up sheets from 1998. Minutes bound with rubber bands brittle from age. Maggie coughed at the dust. If sin has a smell, it is damp cardboard. Cole found the finance committee files by year. The relevant folder was not missing, which surprised him. People who stole often trusted clutter to hide what locks would advertise. Inside were printed minutes, a list of attendees, bank forms, and donation pledges. Cole photographed every page. Then he saw Ruth's signature. It appeared on the authorization to move the fund into a new managed account. The handwriting looked like hers from the Christmas cards he remembered, careful and upright. But something about it sat wrong. The letters were too smooth. Ruth's real handwriting, even years ago, had tiny pauses where thought caught up with kindness. This signature flowed like a practiced copy. Maggie! She leaned over. Looks like Ruth. Too much. Meaning? A forged signature often looks more like the person's name than the person's hand. Maggie stared at him. That's either wise or creepy. Both. Atlas gave a low huff near the file cabinet. Cole turned. The dog had his nose against the bottom drawer. Cole pulled it open. Empty except for a fallen envelope taped to the underside, hidden badly or hurriedly. He removed it, photographed its position, and opened it. Inside was a photocopy of a hospital discharge form for Ruth Whitaker dated the same day as the account authorization. Time of discharge, 6:40 p.m. Meeting minutes claimed Ruth had signed the document at 5:15 p.m. in the church office. She was in the hospital, Maggie whispered. At 5:15. Cole nodded. Somebody kept this copy. Samuel, maybe. Or Ruth. Or whoever wanted insurance. Above them, a floorboard creaked. Cole raised his hand. Maggie froze. Atlas moved without sound to the stairs. Another creak. Then the side door opened, not forced this time, a key. Cole motioned Maggie behind the shelves and unclipped Atlas's leash. He did not draw a weapon. There was no need to turn uncertainty into danger. He simply positioned himself where he could see the stairwell and be seen if someone came down. Heavy footsteps crossed the hall above. A man's voice called, "Pastor, you here?" Ethan. Maggie mouthed the name with a curse she did not say aloud. Cole stayed still. Pastor Samuel answered from above, voice thinner than before but controlled. "In the hall, Ethan. Heard the bell. Wanted to check in." How kind. Samuel had apparently found a backbone under the tea. Ethan's steps moved closer to the basement door. Cole could picture him at the top, deciding whether to descend. Atlas stood at the bottom stair, eyes fixed upward, body relaxed in a way that meant he could become motion quickly. "Are you alone?" Ethan asked. Samuel paused. Maggie was here. Was? She went to find cleaning supplies. Cole admired the pastor's first lie of useful size. Ethan laughed lightly. Basement's a mess, huh? Old records everywhere. You should let me help digitize that. Paper gets lost, misread, causes confusion. Does it? Of course. Look what happened with Aunt Ruth. Aunt Ruth. The phrase made Maggie's hands curl into fists. Cole heard Ethan take one step onto the stairs. Atlas did not growl. He simply exhaled a deep, controlled sound from the chest. Ethan stopped. Is that a dog? Cole stepped into view. Selective. Ethan's face changed so fast Cole almost missed it. Surprise, calculation, annoyance, then concern painted on top. Cole! Wow, busy day. For everyone. Ethan looked at the open boxes, the papers in Cole's hand, Maggie behind the shelf, no longer hiding because she had no gift for it. What's going on? Church records. Those are private. Maggie laughed once. Suddenly he loves privacy. Ethan ignored her. Pastor Samuel, you should be careful. Old documents can be misunderstood. Samuel stood at the top of the stairs, one hand on the railing, still pale but upright. So can silence. Ethan's jaw tightened. I came to help, then help by answering a question, Cole said. Where was Ruth at 5:15 on March 9, 3 years ago? How would I know? You drove her that day. Ethan blinked. I drove her many days. Hospital discharge says she was still under care when the fund transfer was signed at the church. Ethan's eyes dropped to the envelope, then away. Too late. Then the form is wrong. Hospital records are usually less creative than meeting minutes. You don't understand how this town works. Cole stepped up one stair. I'm learning. Ethan's voice lowered. You think because you were some kind of special operator you can come back and play detective? This isn't one of your missions. Cole kept his face still. Good. Missions end. This won't until Ruth's name is clean. For a second, Ethan looked not angry but frightened. That interested Cole more. Men like Preston carried power like a coat. Ethan carried fear like a concealed injury. You're going to get people hurt, Ethan said. It sounded almost like warning. Who? Everyone who keeps digging. Maggie came forward. Who did this to Samuel? Ethan looked at her too quickly. What? Door locked, window broken, bell ringing. Don't pretend you came because the Holy Spirit sent a calendar invite. His mouth thinned. You people want a villain because it makes Ruth innocent. No, Samuel said from above. We want truth because she is. That landed. Ethan looked at the pastor as though betrayed by furniture. Then he turned and left. The door shut hard enough to shake dust from the basement ceiling. Atlas looked at Cole, asking permission to dislike him officially. Soon, Cole murmured. They waited until Ethan's car pulled away. Then Cole gathered the documents, made copies on the church machine, and placed originals back where they belonged, except for the hidden hospital copy, which Samuel insisted Cole take. I should have found courage earlier, the pastor said. Cole looked at the old man, at the small bandage on his forehead, at the records in his hands. Earlier is gone, Samuel nodded. Then I will start with now. On the drive back, Maggie followed in her wagon, while Atlas sat silent beside Cole, nose occasionally lifting toward the vent, as if Ethan's scent had offended the truck. Snow began again, not heavy, just persistent. Cole called Lena and asked her to verify the hospital record. He called Harold and told him they were 10 minutes out. Ruth answered instead. Harold is making soup, she said. Should I warn the county? Depends what he put in it. Pride and carrots, mostly. Cole heard Harold in the background, objecting to culinary slander. The sound loosened something in him. We found proof you couldn't have signed one of the papers. Ruth went quiet. Say that again? He did. On the other end, her breath broke, and for a moment she was not the witty old woman by the fire, but a person who had carried a stone so long she had forgotten hands could open. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. I am thanking God. You are simply within range. Cole smiled despite the road. Fair. At the cabin, they spread the documents across the table. Harold leaned over them with reading glasses held together by tape. Ruth touched the hospital form with 2 fingers. Atlas sat under the table, chin on Cole's boot, as if guarding the moment from interruption. Maggie read the meeting minutes aloud. Pastor Samuel on speakerphone confirmed his memory. Lena texted that hospital records matched the discharge form. Piece by piece, the lie lost some of its weather. It did not collapse. Not yet. Lies built by money have beams inside them. But a crack had opened. Harold looked at Cole, and his voice was rough. You did more in 2 days than I did in 3 years. Cole shook his head. You kept her alive. That was the mission. Harold looked away fast. Ruth reached back and found his hand without looking. Outside, the light faded. Cole went to bring in more wood, Atlas at his side. The air smelled clean, sharp, almost sweet. He stacked logs in the porch box and paused when Atlas stiffened. Not toward the road, toward the side wall of the cabin. Cole followed the dog's gaze and saw a dark patch near the woodpile, partly hidden beneath fresh snow. He crouched. A rag, damp with fuel. Beside it, a matchbook from the Lakeside Resort Lounge, the new one owned by Preston Vale. Cole did not touch it. He photographed it, bagged it, and stood very still. Atlas pressed against his leg. Through the window, Ruth laughed at something Maggie had said, the sound warm and alive. Cole looked at the rag, then at the darkening trees, and understood that the people behind this were no longer only trying to bury a debt. They were trying to teach fear. He had been taught by better instructors. He opened the cabin door and kept his voice even. Everyone away from the walls. Now! The words left Cole's mouth calmly, which made everyone move faster. Maggie rose from the table with the documents gathered against her chest. Harold stepped behind Ruth's wheelchair so quickly that the chair bumped the rug, and Ruth, who had lived long enough to know when a man was pretending not to be alarmed, did not ask for explanations until she was in the center of the room, away from the outer wall. Atlas stood at the porch door, body-angled eyes fixed on the side of the cabin where Cole had found the rag and matchbook. There was no roaring flame, no dramatic burst, none of the things movies use to make fear simple. That was what made it uglier. Someone had placed a threat close enough to the woodpile to be understood, but not far enough along to become disaster. A warning disguised as an accident waiting for permission. Cole checked the exterior with a flashlight, moving slowly, photographing before touching, making sure every person inside remained visible through the window. He found no active fire, only the rag, the matchbook, and a faint smell that made Atlas sneeze and bare his teeth in disgust. The dog did not need command to understand the line that had been crossed. People had frightened Ruth. They had used papers, whispers, deadlines, snow, and shame. Now someone had brought danger to the place where she slept. Cole bagged the evidence, packed snow over the suspicious patch near the woodpile, and came back inside with the cold clinging to his coat. Maggie had already put the kettle on, because some women respond to intimidation by boiling water like civilization itself depends on it. Harold stood rigid behind Ruth's chair. His face had gone flat, the way a man's face goes when he is trying to keep old panic from becoming new rage. "Tell me," he said. Cole set the sealed bag on the counter. Possible attempt to scare us. It did not become more than that. Atlas caught it early. Ruth looked down at the dog. Atlas moved to her side and pushed his head beneath her hand. "Good boy," she whispered. "Very good boy." Harold's hands shook once on the wheelchair grips. He pulled them away and shoved them into his pockets. "I should have checked the walls. I should have—" "No," Cole said. Harold looked up, anger needing somewhere to land. No. This is not yours to carry. She's my wife, and you got her through a storm with a pack heavier than sense. You don't have to personally defeat every coward in Idaho." Maggie nodded. "He has a point, and I hate admitting that before dessert." Ruth's mouth trembled into almost a smile. The humor helped. It did not fix anything, but it made breathing possible. Cole called Sheriff Barlow and reported the evidence in precise, unsentimental terms. Barlow arrived 40 minutes later with a deputy, his patrol SUV crunching up the drive, lights off. He looked at the bag, the photos, the woodpile, the matchbook, and the people inside the cabin. "Could be coincidence," he said, but the sentence had less conviction than a paper cup. Maggie crossed her arms. "Tom, if coincidence leaves branded matchbooks beside threatened witnesses, we need to arrest coincidence." Barlow gave her a tired look. "Maggie, don't Maggie me while you're wearing that badge like a winter's scarf." Cole watched the sheriff carefully. Anger from Maggie made Barlow defensive. Calm from Cole seemed to make him nervous. "I need an evidence receipt," Cole said. "You'll get one. And a case number." Barlow's jaw flexed. "Cole, case number." The sheriff held his gaze, then looked away and wrote one down. That small act did not make him brave, but it put one foot in the right direction. After he left, Ruth asked to see the matchbook. Cole hesitated, then held the bag where she could read the logo without touching it. Lakeside Resort Lounge, Preston Vale's newest pride. All stone fireplaces, antler chandeliers, and cocktails named after mountains. Ruth closed her eyes. "I used to clean rooms there when it was the old lodge, before Preston bought it. Harold repaired the porch one summer. They tore it all out. New folks don't like old wood," Harold said. "Old wood remembers who leaned on it." Cole looked at him. "Say things like that in court and people will think you're a poet." "I am a carpenter." Same thing, less applause. By dawn, the cabin had become a command post, despite Cole's effort to avoid military words. The table held copies of records, a map of town names written on Maggie's diner napkins, Lena's medical notes, and Ruth's prayer can, which she insisted belonged there because paperwork without prayer becomes a committee and nobody survives that. Cole made lists. Maggie made calls. Harold sharpened pencils with a pocket knife and complained that modern pens had no spine. Ruth rested, then corrected dates from memory with startling precision. Atlas slept only in short shifts, rising every time a vehicle passed below the ridge. Around mid-morning, Cole drove to the Whitaker house with Atlas, leaving Maggie and Lena at the cabin and extracting from Harold a promise not to follow by telling him he was needed to guard Ruth. The old man understood manipulation and accepted it because it was respectful manipulation. The Whitaker house stood on a small rise east of town, a modest two-story place with faded blue siding and a porch Harold had built himself. Snow softened its sagging steps. A county notice hung by the door. Beyond the back fence, orange survey flags marked the slope leading toward the lake, bright little wounds in the white. Cole did not break the seal on the door. He had obtained Ruth's written permission and called Barlow to notify him he was documenting personal property for the owners. Barlow had sighed, then said, "Don't make me regret being decent." Cole had answered, "Then keep practicing." Inside the house smelled of cold dust, lavender soap, and abandonment. Atlas moved room to room, nose working. Cole photographed everything, the kitchen table with 2 mugs still in the sink, The wall where family pictures had been removed in a hurry, the empty bookshelf, the sewing room at the back where Ruth had spent years mending clothes for people who paid late or not at all. The sewing room stopped him. Not because it was dramatic, because it was ordinary. A pincushion shaped like a tomato, thread spools sorted by color, a lamp with tape on the cord, a chair cushion flattened by decades of use. Lives are not stolen only in courtrooms. Sometimes they are stolen from the chair where a woman knows exactly where the blue thread sits. Atlas sniffed beneath the sewing table, then pawed lightly at a loose floorboard. Cole crouched. "Show me." The dog backed up. Cole lifted the board with a small pry tool. Beneath it sat a flat tin box wrapped in wax paper. Not the missing notebook, but something Ruth had hidden. He opened it carefully. Inside were copies of old relief fund receipts, handwritten notes, a list of veterans helped over the years, and letters. One envelope bore Caleb Mercer's name. Cole did not open that one yet. His hand would not do it. Instead, he examined the receipts. Several entries had stars beside them in Ruth's handwriting. The dates matched the period before the missing funds were discovered. Vendor names appeared more than once. Northridge Consulting, Clearwater Hospitality Services, VM Holdings, VM Vale Mountain. There it was again. Not proof by itself, but a pattern with footprints. Atlas moved to the closet and sniffed a hanging coat. He gave a short bark. Cole checked the pocket and found a small USB drive inside a pill bottle labeled with Ruth's old prescription. Clever, he thought. Simple enough to be overlooked. He bagged it, and the hallway floorboards creaked. Cole froze. Atlas turned toward the front of the house, silent. A shadow crossed the frosted glass of the door. Then a knock came. 3 polite taps. Cole did not answer. Another knock. "Mr. Mercer?" A man's voice called. "This property is restricted." Cole recognized Ethan. He moved to the side window and saw Ethan standing on the porch with 2 men in dark winter coats near the steps. Not masked, not theatrically threatening. That made them more believable. Men sent to intimidate in daylight tend to trust paperwork more than fists. Cole opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. "Afternoon." Ethan's smile looked brittle. "You can't be here. Ruth gave permission. Ruth no longer has legal control of the property. Disputed." One of the men shifted. Atlas stepped into view beside Cole. The man stopped shifting. Ethan saw the dog and swallowed annoyance. "Look, Cole, this is getting uncomfortable. Preston wants to resolve the matter humanely. Harold and Ruth can be placed somewhere safe. Medical costs can be discussed. But if you keep trespassing, removing documents, harassing people, you create legal exposure for yourself and for them. That's a lot of concern." "I'm serious." "So am I." Cole lifted his phone. "You're on video. Say everything again slower." Ethan's smile vanished. "You think that scares me?" "No, I think it records you." From somewhere down the road came the low rumble of a vehicle. Ethan glanced back. A black SUV waited at the curb, engine running, tinted windows. Cole angled the phone, capturing it. Ethan's voice dropped. "You have no idea how much money is behind this." "Money gets cold, too." "What?" "Nothing." Cole closed the door, locked it, and waited until the porch emptied. Atlas remained rigid until the SUV drove away. Only then did Cole let out the breath he had held. He was careful not to chase, not to escalate, not to turn intimidation into spectacle. The goal was evidence. The goal was Ruth. Back at the cabin, the USB drive became the room's center of gravity. Cole would not plug it into his own laptop directly, and Maggie approved of this as if she understood cybersecurity because she once banned a nephew from downloading poker games on the diner computer. Cole called an old teammate, Aaron Pike, who now worked financial investigations in Boise. Aaron answered with, "Mercer, if this is you asking whether I know a guy, I hate how often the answer is yes." Cole explained only what was necessary. Aaron's tone sobered. Send images. Don't send originals. Use a clean device if you access that drive. And Cole? Yeah. This is civilian terrain. Paperwork kills slower than bullets, but it still kills. Stay boring. Trying. Try harder. You were never naturally gifted at boring. Cole looked at the table, at Harold and Ruth, at Atlas trying to nose open the tea biscuit tin. I've changed. Aaron laughed once. No, you got quieter. Different problem. They arranged a secure review. Lena borrowed a clean laptop from the clinic, one used for patient education and not connected to sensitive systems. The USB held scans of checks, emails, printed to PDF, and a spreadsheet Ruth had started before her stroke. She had titled it, Questions for Samuel, which hurt Cole more than if she had titled it, Fraud. Even then, she had been trying to clarify before accusing. The spreadsheet showed transfers to Northridge Consulting and Clearwater Hospitality Services, with notes beside them, no invoice, duplicate vendor address. Ethan said, correction, ask bank. The dates lined up with the missing funds. One PDF showed a consulting agreement signed by Ethan as local representative and approved by a Preston Vale project manager. Ruth stared at the screen. I knew it was wrong. Harold put a hand on her shoulder. She covered it with hers. I knew it. And then I got sick, and everyone told me not to worry. You were ill, Lena said. Illness is not guilt. Ruth nodded, but tears slipped down anyway. They were not dramatic tears. They were exhausted ones, the body releasing a truth it had defended alone too long. Cole looked away, giving her privacy. Atlas did not. Atlas pressed his large head into her lap with no regard for human embarrassment. Ruth laughed through the tears. Oh, you dear bossy thing. Harold wiped his eyes with the back of one hand and pretended it was dust. That evening, Maggie returned to town with copies tucked inside a flour sack because, as she said, nobody searches carbs. She planned to speak quietly with Helen at the bank and Walt, the plow driver. Pastor Samuel agreed to review all finance committee minutes and prepare a written statement. Lena stayed to monitor Ruth. Cole stepped outside with Atlas after dark. The stars had appeared between clouds, cold and sharp. The cabin stood behind him, lit gold at the windows. Voices drifted out, Ruth correcting Harold's memory of their first date, Lena laughing, Harold insisting he had not been nervous, just strategically quiet. Cole should have felt satisfaction. Instead, he felt the old unease that came when progress made people visible. Visibility drew fire. Not literal fire, he reminded himself. Not if they were careful. Not if they stayed boring. Atlas leaned against his leg. You think I'm making this about me? Cole asked the dog. Atlas looked up. His eyes reflected porch light. That's not an answer. The dog yawned, which was an answer of a kind. Cole took the sealed envelope with Caleb's letter from his pocket. He had opened everything else. Not that. He turned it over. On the front, in Ruth's careful hand, was written, For Cole, when pride stops being louder than need. He almost laughed. She had known him too well at 17. Maybe she knew him still. He did not open it, not yet. Down the ridge, headlights moved slowly between trees, then stopped near the road where the first watcher had parked. Cole did not go for a weapon. He did not rush. He photographed the lights called Barlow and stood beside Atlas until the vehicle backed away and disappeared. Inside, Ruth was singing softly an old hymn under her breath, not for performance, just to keep fear from owning the room. Cole listened until the last note faded. Then the county dispatcher called back. Mr. Mercer, Sheriff Barlow says no units available on the ridge right now. Cole stared at the dark road. Tell him I hope that sentence ages well. He ended the call and looked at Atlas. The dog had one boot off again. Even with danger near, the old soldier had priorities. Cole crouched, fixed the boot, and whispered, Stay boring, buddy. Atlas licked his nose and immediately stepped into the deepest snowbank available. The next morning came bright enough to make the snowfields shine like broken glass, and Cole distrusted it on principle. Bad weather announced itself honestly. Clear weather invited people to pretend nothing was wrong. He woke before dawn, not from the old 217 shock this time, but from the quiet absence of it, which somehow felt stranger. Atlas lay across the bedroom doorway, one boot missing, one ear lifted toward the living room where Harold snored in a recliner and Ruth slept on the couch with a blanket tucked to her chin. Lena had taken the guest room after threatening to sedate every stubborn person in the cabin by seniority. Maggie had gone back to the diner to open, because fear might close a town, but pancakes kept it from feeling proud about it. Cole stood in the kitchen with Caleb's unopened letter beside the coffee pot and the USB drive locked in a small case Aaron Pike had told him to improvise from a metal recipe box. He should have felt ridiculous storing possible financial evidence between recipe cards for rhubarb pie and venison stew. Instead, it seemed exactly like Sandpoint justice, hiding behind things people used every day. Aaron called at 6:12. I reviewed the images. Cole stepped onto the porch so his voice would not wake Ruth. The air bit the inside of his nose. Atlas followed, insulted that evidence might be discussed without him. And the transfers are dirty. I cannot say criminal from images alone, but the pattern is not normal charity administration. Vendor accounts connect to entities that connect to Vale Mountain Holdings. Some are layered, but not brilliantly. More like someone assumed old church people would not chase paperwork across state registration databases. He appears on 2 documents as local liaison. The big fish is Preston Vale or whoever handles his development finance. I need originals, bank confirmation, testimony, and someone local willing to say Ruth questioned the transfers before the accusation. Pastor Samuel. Good. Bank officer. Maybe. Get maybe to yes. Also, Cole, this goes beyond clearing Ruth socially. If funds meant for veterans were diverted, federal interest may apply depending on sources. Move carefully. Preserve chain of custody. Do not let your dog eat evidence. Cole looked at Atlas, who was chewing a clump of snow with ceremonial focus. No promises. Aaron paused. How are you? Busy. That is not an emotional state. It is today. You still wake at the same time? Cole watched sunlight touch the trees. He could lie, but old teammates hear lies in breathing. Most nights, you talking to anybody? Dog licensed, higher clearance than you. Aaron laughed softly. Fair. Just remember, helping these people will not retroactively save Danny. The name crossed the porch like a cold blade laid flat. Not cutting. Present. Cole closed his eyes. Danny Reese, the owner of the cracked watch. The man who had joked about retirement pancakes 3 minutes before the mission went wrong. I know. Do you? Aaron asked. Because paperwork wars are perfect for men who want punishment disguised as purpose. Cole looked through the window at Ruth sleeping, at Harold slumped beside her, one hand open as if still holding wheelchair grips in dreams. This is not punishment. Make sure. The call ended. Cole stood there a long moment. Atlas bumped his hand. The dog did not understand the word guilt, perhaps because dogs do not waste time naming storms when they can smell rain. Cole looked down at him and remembered the day Atlas had been cleared from duty. The veterinarian using words like age and joints and quality of life, while Atlas stared at the exam room door as if orders might still arrive. Cole had signed the retirement papers with more grief than he expected, because it felt like admitting both of them had been brought home from a war that did not know how to release them. Since then, Atlas had invented new missions, checking windows, judging visitors, waking Cole before nightmares could finish their work, and now guarding an old woman whose hand fit naturally between his ears. Maybe purpose did not always arrive with flags. Maybe sometimes it limped in wearing a plaid shawl and asked for tea. Inside, Ruth woke and asked whether the son had survived. Harold said it had, but was showing off. Breakfast became oatmeal again, improved by Maggie's cinnamon rolls delivered through a plow driver who announced he had seen nothing, knew nothing, and would return for the empty pan because his wife trusted him with roads but not dishware. His name was Walt Kinney. He came back at noon exactly as Maggie predicted, and this time Cole met him outside by the woodpile. Walt was a broad man with a beard full of ice crystals and the moral discomfort of someone who had rehearsed silence until it made him sick. "Maggie says you might have seen something near the Whitaker place," Cole said. Walt studied the snow shovel in his hands. "Maggie says too much. Usually means she knows too much." "Black SUV," Walt muttered. "Night before the audit story broke. Parked behind the old lodge road. I was plowing because weather was coming. Saw Ethan's white crossover there too. Thought maybe resort business. Then Ruth got accused, house got tangled up, and I figured maybe I ought to mention it. Then Preston's office suddenly hired my brother-in-law's repair shop for the plow fleet. Good contract. My sister has 3 kids." He looked up, ashamed and defensive. "People think courage is free until their family's heat bill shows up." Cole nodded. "Will you write what you saw?" Walt flinched. "I don't know." "Then start with telling the truth to yourself. Paper can wait an hour." Walt stared at him, then gave a reluctant half laugh. "You always talk like that, unfortunately. Must be tiring. Everyone says that." Walt agreed to meet Maggie later and put the statement in writing if Pastor Samuel did the same. It was not victory, but it was movement. In the afternoon, Cole drove with Atlas to the bank where Helen Price worked behind a desk decorated with grandchildren photos and a small wooden cross. Helen had the wary smile of someone who had been warned. "Mr. Mercer, bank privacy rules are strict." "Good." Cole set Ruth's signed permission on the desk, along with copies of the hospital record. "Then strict should help the person whose signature was used while she was in the hospital." Helen read. Her face changed slowly, professionally, then personally. "I remember that day." Cole stayed silent. Helen looked toward the lobby, then lowered her voice. "Ethan came in with paperwork. Power of attorney, he said. Temporary assistance because Ruth was recovering. I asked whether she understood the account change. He said yes. He had a video on his phone of Ruth saying she trusted him to help with papers. Did she mention the relief fund? No, she looked tired. I remember thinking the video felt wrong, not forced, just incomplete. Like someone had asked her one question and used the answer for another. Helen pressed her lips together. I should have called Ruth directly. Will you say that, if subpoenaed? Before that? Her eyes flicked to the cross. I have a job. Cole leaned back. He did not shame her. Shame had built this mess as much as greed. Ruth had a job too. Helen closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the banker mask had cracked. Give me until tomorrow. Tomorrow may be enough. Outside the bank, Atlas stopped at the corner and sniffed hard toward an alley behind the building. Cole followed. In the snow near the service entrance lay a cigarette butt, crushed into slush peppermint tobacco. Beside it, faint boot prints led to where a vehicle had parked. Cole photographed both. Atlas sneezed, offended anew. Before they reached the truck, a black SUV pulled to the curb. The rear window lowered. Preston Vale looked out. He was exactly as Maggie had described, and not at all like a villain from a sermon. 48 silver at the temples, navy coat tailored perfectly, face handsome in a forgettable corporate way. His eyes were pale, attentive, practiced at making people feel briefly important. Mr. Mercer, he said, may we talk? Cole stood on the sidewalk with Atlas beside him. We are. Preston smiled. Privately? No. The smile held. I understand your caution. Harold and Ruth Whitaker are dear to many in this community. Their situation is unfortunate. That word is doing a lot of work. So is your presence. Preston glanced at Atlas. Beautiful dog. Atlas stared at him without blinking. He seems less convinced, Preston said. He has standards. Preston chuckled softly. I admire loyalty, truly, but loyalty can become harmful when it blinds good people to hard facts. The Whitakers are elderly. Ruth's health is fragile. Harold is proud beyond reason. Their house is unsafe. Their finances are ruined. Whatever happened with the relief fund dragging them through a public fight will exhaust them. I can arrange comfortable housing, medical support, debt resolution. Quietly. Respectfully. In exchange for peace. Whose? Preston's eyes cooled. Everyone's. Cole heard Aaron's voice stay boring. He kept his hands visible, voice mild. Make the offer through Ruth's attorney. She has no attorney. She will. Paid by you, arranged by me. There is a difference. There is to Ruth. Preston studied him. You are not wealthy enough to fight me indefinitely, Mr. Mercer. Probably not. And yet, I have time. Men like you rarely do. The words were quiet, almost sympathetic. I read your service record. Public portions only, of course. Decorated. Difficult transition. A tragedy overseas. I understand why this cause appeals to you. Saving the helpless can feel like absolution. Cole felt Atlas lean against his leg, warm, heavy, present. Preston had done homework. Men like him always did. You should read less. Preston's smile returned. You should ask yourself whether you are helping the Whitakers or using them to fight ghosts. Cole looked at the SUV, the driver, the clean tires, the faint reflection of himself in the tinted glass. Maybe both. That honesty seemed to surprise Preston. Cole continued, but Ruth did not sign that transfer at 5:15. Ethan had access. Your companies received money. Someone left a threat at my cabin. Someone locked a pastor in a basement. Ghosts are busy for dead people. Preston's face did not change, but the temperature around him seemed to drop. Careful with accusations. Careful with old people. For a moment, neither moved. Then Preston lifted the window. The SUV pulled away, smooth as a lie. Cole looked down. Atlas had placed one paw on his boot. Yeah, Cole said. I heard him. At the cabin that evening, the group reviewed what they had. Ruth listened to the account of Preston's offer without surprise. He wants us comfortable and quiet, she said. A padded room is still a room. Harold's voice was rough. We should take something, not his offer, but lawyer, doctor, a place safer than here. He looked at Cole, the admission costing him. I cannot keep asking Ruth to be brave in cold rooms. Ruth turned in her chair. Harold, no, Ruthie. Pride has been driving this wagon with one wheel missing. The room stilled. Harold looked at Cole. If help can be written down proper, not charity, not ownership, then we accept enough to keep her warm and breathing while we fight. Cole nodded. Done. Ruth's eyes filled. I wanted to say that first. Harold bent and kissed her hair. I know. I got old and rude. Maggie wiped her eyes and pretended to search for a napkin. Lena looked at Cole as if to say, remember this. This is what help looks like when it does not need to conquer. Later, after everyone settled, Cole finally opened Caleb's letter. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and age. His father's handwriting staggered across the page. Cole, if Ruth gives you this, it means I never found the nerve. The Whitakers paid what I could not. I was too proud to thank them and too ashamed to tell you. You were angry, but you were not bad. I was the storm in that house, son, not you. If you got out, it was because some people held the door. The rest blurred. Cole sat at the kitchen table, letter in both hands, while the cabin slept around him. Atlas came and rested his head on Cole's knee. Cole did not cry loudly. He did not break. He simply bowed his head and let the truth enter without saluting it. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft as forgiveness but colder. His phone buzzed. A text from Maggie. Ethan wants to talk. Alone. Says he knows where Ruth's notebook went. Cole looked at Atlas. The dog was already awake. Cole did not meet Ethan alone. He let Ethan believe he would, which was different and, in his opinion, spiritually acceptable under the circumstances. The message named the old boat launch north of town a place where the lake froze in uneven plates, and summer tourists took photographs of sunsets without realizing winter turned the same shore into something harsher and more honest. Ethan wanted midnight. Cole chose 8 p.m. and replied that roads got worse later. Men setting traps often hated practical scheduling. Ethan sent back only fine. Maggie objected to the plan with both hands on her hips and a dish towel over one shoulder like a sash of authority. You know what happens when people meet at boat launches in winter? Nothing with pie. Lena agreed, though, with medical vocabulary. Harold offered to come, which caused Ruth to tell him she had not kept him alive 78 years so he could audition for foolishness with a bad knee. Pastor Samuel volunteered to wait at the church with lights on and phone ready. Sheriff Barlow was notified by message, not request, because Cole had learned the man responded better when decency was given an appointment. Atlas waited by the door through all of this, wearing 3 boots and hiding the 4th beneath his own chest. Cole found it anyway. You are a professional, he said, fastening the strap. Atlas looked at Ruth for appeal. Ruth lifted both palms. I cannot defend you in this. Snow is cold. The dog sighed with theatrical despair. The boat launch sat under a line of bare cottonwoods, the lake beyond it a dark sheet edged by snow. Cole parked where the truck faced the exit, left the headlights on low, and stepped out with Atlas on leash. Maggie's station wagon waited farther up the road with Lena inside, engine off, phone ready. Pastor Samuel's church bell tower was visible across town as a small square of light. Barlow had not answered, but Cole had not expected miracles on schedule. Ethan arrived in his white crossover 12 minutes late. He got out alone, hands visible, face pale under the lot lamp. Without the office lighting and polished smile, he looked younger and more frightened. Fear did not absolve him. It did explain the smell of sweat beneath his mint cologne. You brought the dog? Ethan said. He brought me. Funny? Not really. Ethan looked toward the lake. I do not have much time. Then spend it well. Ruth's notebook was taken by Preston's auditor after the finance meeting. I saw him put it in his briefcase. I asked about it later, and Preston told me old people keep confused notes that can create liability. Cole watched his face. Why tell me now? Ethan laughed once, sharp and empty. Because Preston is going to bury me with them if this goes wrong. He already has documents making it look like I masterminded the transfers. Maybe I deserve that. Maybe not all of it. Where is the notebook? I don't know. Atlas shifted, nose lifting toward Ethan's coat pocket. Ethan noticed and flinched. Cole said nothing. Ethan reached slowly into the pocket and removed a small key on a tag. But I know where he keeps problem files. Storage unit near Ponderay. Climate controlled because rich men even keep sins comfortable. He held out the key, then pulled it back before Cole could take it. I want a deal. Not mine to give. Protection then. From Preston, from everyone. From him, from the sheriff if he decides to save himself, from Harold if he finds out how much I signed. Ethan's voice cracked. I told myself I was helping. At first. They said the house was too much for them. The fund was messy. Ruth was declining. Harold was stubborn. Preston said development would bring jobs and the Whitakers would be taken care of. Then debts got involved, mine. Preston covered them. After that, every favor had a hook. Cole let the silence stand. In the team's confession often came in bursts once the door opened. Interruptions made men retreat. Ethan stared at the lake. I did not set the cabin thing. But you know who did. He swallowed. I know Preston's security man scared people. I did not ask details. Convenient. Yes. The word was small, honest. I signed forms. I told Helen that Ruth understood. I drove Ruth home from the hospital and filmed her saying she trusted me with papers. She thought we meant insurance forms. I used it for the account transfer. He covered his face with both hands. She made me soup that day. Atlas gave a low whine, not sympathy exactly, recognition of distress. Cole did not soften. Why Ruth? Because she saw the transfers. Because her illness made doubt easy. Because people believe confusion before corruption when the accused is old and poor. And Harold's house? Preston needed the ridge parcels for the access road. Most owners sold. Harold refused. Once Ruth was accused, legal bills made pressure. I helped structure the loan. Then I helped break it. Ethan looked at Cole, eyes wet. I am not asking you to tell me I am good. I am asking you to let me fix some of it before Preston fixes me. A vehicle moved on the road above, too slow. Cole did not look directly. Atlas did. The dog's body tightened. Ethan saw and panicked. He followed me. Who? I don't know. Maybe his security guy. Get in your car. Drive to Maggie's. Lena will follow. Stay where people can see you. What about the key? Cole held out his hand. Ethan dropped it into his palm. Their fingers did not touch. Storage unit number C14. Code is 0217. Cole's hand closed around the key. Why that code? Ethan shook his head. Preston thought it was funny. Said every man has a minute he can be bought with. I don't know what that means. Cole did. For a second, the lake disappeared and the old watch ticked without moving. Preston had read more than public records. He had found the minute. He had turned Danny's death into a lock code. Atlas pressed hard against Cole's leg, grounding him before anger could choose the wrong road. Go, Cole said. Ethan got into his car. As he pulled out, headlights above the lot switched on and followed. Maggie's station wagon roared to life with all the subtlety of a diner woman entering battle through traffic laws. Lena called Cole. We are behind him. Keep distance. Do not engage. Go to the diner. You sound too calm. I am not. Good to know. The next hour unfolded in phone calls, not violence. Ethan reached the diner, shaken but safe. The trailing vehicle turned off before town captured on Maggie's dash camera as a dark SUV with a partial plate. Barlow finally called, irritated, until Cole mentioned recorded confession storage unit and possible witness intimidation. Then the sheriff went quiet. Bring me the key, he said. No. Cole, get a warrant. I will meet you there with Pastor Samuel. Maggie and a camera. Chain of custody, remember? Barlow cursed softly. Not at Cole, perhaps, but at the fact that doing things properly had become harder than ignoring them. Give me 2 hours. You have 1. In truth, it took 3 because judges sleep and weather ignores civic urgency. By midnight, a small group stood outside the Ponderay storage facility. Cole, Atlas, Barlow, a deputy, Pastor Samuel, Maggie, and a clerk from the judge's office who looked deeply unhappy to be part of history in snow boots. The warrant was narrow. The camera was on, and the storage manager kept saying he had no idea what was in C14, which Cole believed because the man seemed too frightened to lie creatively. The unit door rolled up with a metallic rattle. Inside were file boxes, 2 framed resort renderings, a broken office chair, and a gray safe. Barlow documented each step. No one touched the safe until the deputy checked the warrant language twice. The code 0217 opened it. Cole felt the number in his teeth. Inside lay a stack of folders labeled by property names, a portable drive cash envelopes, and a small black notebook with Ruth Whitaker written on the inside cover in blue ink. Pastor Samuel put a hand over his mouth. Maggie whispered something that might have been a prayer and might have been a threat against men with expensive haircuts. Cole did not touch the notebook. Barlow lifted it with gloves, placed it in an evidence bag, and for once looked like the badge fit. "This changes things," he said. Cole looked at him. "It reveals them." Back at the cabin, near dawn, Ruth sat by the fire, wrapped in the red plaid shawl, waiting. Harold had tried to make her sleep, failed, and now sat beside her with the defeated dignity of a man whose wife outranked him under natural law. Cole came in with Atlas' first snow on his shoulders. Barlow followed, surprising them all. He held up the evidence bag with the notebook inside. Ruth's face crumpled silently. Harold made a sound like a board splitting under too much weight. Barlow removed his hat. "Mrs. Whitaker, I owe you an apology. Not the whole apology yet. I expect that one will take paperwork and public words. But I should have looked harder." Ruth wiped her cheek. "Yes, you should have." Barlow nodded. "I will." Harold stared at him with open hostility. Ruth reached back and touched Harold's hand. "Let the man begin, Harold." The sheriff looked grateful and ashamed. "Ethan is at the diner. I put a deputy there. He has agreed to give a statement." "Will he be safe?" Ruth asked. Everyone looked at her, even Cole. Ruth lifted her chin. "Do not confuse justice with wanting a frightened fool harmed. Ethan did wrong. He can answer for it breathing." That was Ruth. That was why they had chosen her as a target and why they had underestimated her. Barlow left to process evidence. Maggie stayed because the diner was now guarded and because she claimed Harold could not be trusted with breakfast under emotional conditions. As dawn touched the windows, Ruth asked for her prayer can. Cole brought it. She opened it, removed a folded slip, and read silently. Then she handed it to him. The paper was old, written in her careful hand. "Years ago, Lord, keep Cole Mercer alive until he learns he is loved." Cole stared at the words until they blurred. "You prayed that?" "Many times. Why?" Ruth smiled tiredly. "Because you looked like a boy daring the world to prove him right." Cole folded the paper with hands that had steadied under far worse pressure, and shook now anyway. Atlas put his head on Cole's knee. Harold looked into the fire. "We all prayed it," he said. "Some of us with less fancy language." Cole laughed once, and it broke into something close to a sob before he caught it. Nobody mocked him. Nobody saved him from it. That was worse and better. Later that morning, Lena checked Ruth and frowned. The strain had cost her. Her breathing was weaker, her pulse tired. "Hospital," Lena said. Ruth began to object. Harold did too. Lena lifted one finger. "I have listened to enough Whitaker opinions to qualify for sainthood. Hospital. Now." Cole prepared the truck. Atlas stood beside Ruth's chair as she was bundled in blankets. Before leaving, Ruth looked around the cabin at the documents, the fire the people gathered by accident and choice. "This is not how I imagined being vindicated," she said. Harold bent to kiss her forehead. "How did you imagine it? With better tea and less crime?" Maggie said, "I can handle one of those." They all smiled. Then Ruth coughed, and the smile vanished into motion. Cole drove carefully toward the hospital, while Atlas lay across the backseat floor beneath Ruth's hand. Halfway down the ridge, Ruth whispered, "Cole." "Yes, ma'am." "Do not let them make this ugly." He understood. She did not mean the facts. Facts could be ugly. She meant the telling. No spectacle, no cruelty, no turning pain into appetite. Ruth had seen enough church fundraisers, local scandals, and family grief to know how quickly pain could be dressed up for attention until the hurting person disappeared behind the lesson everyone else wanted to learn. Cole thought of cameras outside courthouses, of headlines that made old people sound like symbols of his own memories turned into a file Preston had tried to use as leverage. He wanted justice that kept faces attached to names. He wanted Ruth to remain Ruth, funny, stubborn, faithful, tired, sharp as a quilting needle. I won't. Outside, the snowfields gleamed under morning light, beautiful enough to make a person forget how close they had come to being a grave. Cole kept both hands on the wheel and drove toward help. Hospitals have their own weather. Fluorescent light instead of sun, antiseptic air instead of snow machines whispering in steady rhythms that make fear feel scheduled. Bonner General was small enough that half the nurses knew Ruth by name and large enough for Harold to look lost the moment automatic doors opened. Cole had seen men move through foreign compounds with more confidence than Harold showed crossing the polished lobby floor. The old man kept one hand on the back of Ruth's wheelchair and the other on the strap of the backpack he had refused to leave behind. It looked smaller indoors, but no less heavy. Atlas walked at Ruth's side wearing his vest and all 4 boots because Lena had pointed at him in the parking lot and said, "Hospital floors are not your personal rebellion space." The dog obeyed, though his expression suggested he would be filing a complaint with whichever agency governed paw dignity. Ruth was taken back for evaluation, not rushed, not dramatized, just surrounded by competent people who spoke gently and moved with purpose. Cole stayed in the waiting area with Harold, Maggie, Lena, and Pastor Samuel. Barlow came later, hat in hand, to say Ethan's formal statement had begun and the storage evidence was secured. He looked at Harold as if expecting fire. Harold gave him ice instead. "You do your job now," he said. "We'll discuss yesterday after my wife breathes easier." Barlow accepted that as mercy. Cole sat near the wall where he could see both hallway entrances. Atlas lay across his boots, a warm weight, making escape impolite. Maggie returned from the vending machines with snacks no adult should trust. Peanut butter crackers, stale pretzels, and something calling itself a breakfast bar despite being frosted like a child's apology. Harold took the crackers. "Thank you. Don't get sentimental, they cost $2 and my faith in commerce." Pastor Samuel tried to smile and failed. He had brought Ruth's Bible and held it in his lap like evidence from a better court. Lena stood by the nurse's station speaking in low tones with a former colleague, translating medical updates into the plain language families need when worry tries to become imagination. Cole watched them all and felt the old uselessness of waiting. Waiting had been the worst part overseas, too. Not danger. Danger gave orders. Waiting left men alone with what they could not control. He took out the cracked watch and turned it over in his palm. Danny Reese's initials were scratched on the back, clumsy and crooked, done one night with a knife tip, because Danny had said, "If I lose it, I want whoever finds it to know an idiot owned it." Cole had laughed then. He had not known memory could become a room with no doors. Lena returned and sat beside him. "Ruth is stable. They want to keep her for observation, adjust medications, make sure exposure did not worsen things." Harold closed his eyes. Maggie exhaled. Pastor Samuel whispered, "Thank you, Lord." Cole nodded once. The release should have landed cleanly, but Preston's words returned. Saving the helpless can feel like absolution. Cole hated that the man had been partly right in the way cruel people can sometimes locate a wound and mistake it for wisdom. Lena saw his face. "Walk with me." "I'm fine. I did not ask for fiction." They walked to a quiet corridor near a window, looking out over the parking lot. Snowmelt dripped from cars. A volunteer pushed a cart of flowers past them. Lena crossed her arms. "Aaron called me." Cole looked at her. "That violates at least 6 Brotherhood rules." "Good.
Brotherhood rules have terrible mental health outcomes. I'm handling it. You are functioning. That is not the same. Cole looked through the window. In the reflection, he saw himself as the town saw him now. Tall, controlled parka, zipped beard, rough eyes, tired. A man who could carry things.
People loved men who could carry things because it spared them asking what the weight did. Not today, he said. Lena softened but did not retreat. Today especially. You are helping Ruth. You are also standing in a room full of old guilt, your father's letter, Danny's watch, the people who saved teenage you, and a developer who read your trauma like a file. That is a lot of weather, Cole. He almost smiled at the word. Ruth said houses don't like being empty. She is right. I was going to sell the cabin. I know. Now I don't know what I'm doing. That may be the healthiest sentence you said since I met you. He leaned both hands on the window ledge. Danny died at 2:17. Lena did not move. I know. No, you know the report. You don't know that he handed me the watch 10 minutes before because the strap broke and said, "Hold this, Mercer. If I lose track of time, my wife will blame you." You don't know that I was supposed to check the left corridor, and I checked the right because the radio cut out, and I thought... His throat tightened. The hospital corridor blurred. He did not describe the event. He would not turn that memory into pictures for anyone, not even himself, if he could help it. I made a call. It wasn't enough. Lena's voice was quiet. Or it was a call inside a bad situation where not enough was available. That's the sentence people give survivors. Sometimes survivors reject true sentences because guilt feels more loyal than healing. He laughed once without humor. You practice that? Constantly. Men like you require laminated cards. He looked at her then, and the joke did what it was meant to do. It let him breathe without making the pain smaller. Ruth prayed I would live until I learned I was loved. Lena's eyes warmed. Then maybe do not insult the prayer by stopping halfway. When they returned, Harold was speaking with Ruth's doctor, a woman with silver glasses and the calm of someone who had learned not to be hurried by family panic. Ruth would remain overnight. No crisis, but real weakness. Warmth, medication, nutrition, stress reduction. Harold listened as if receiving orders from a commanding officer and nodded so hard Maggie whispered that he might sprain agreement. Ruth, when allowed visitors, looked annoyed by the hospital gown and pleased by the heated blanket. They took my sweater, she said. Medical kidnapping, Harold replied, sitting beside her. I plan to negotiate. You will do no such thing. You will thank the nurses and stop glaring at the blood pressure cuff. Atlas approached the bed slowly, with permission, and laid his chin on the mattress edge. Ruth's hand found his head. There you are. Cole stood near the foot of the bed. Ruth looked at him. Did you sleep? No. That was not an invitation to honesty. Try again, with better judgment, Harold snorted. The room warmed. Barlow arrived in the doorway uncomfortable but determined. Mrs. Whitaker, Ethan's statement confirms he misrepresented documents to the bank and assisted in moving funds under direction from Preston Vale's office. We are bringing in state investigators, possibly federal depending on the relief fund sources. I wanted you to hear it from me. Ruth closed her eyes. Harold gripped the bed rail. Maggie whispered, Say the next part, Tom. Barlow swallowed. The department will issue a public correction regarding the prior implication of your guilt. I am recommending all pending actions tied to the allegation be paused while the investigation proceeds. Ruth opened her eyes. Paused is not cleared. No, ma'am, but it is a start. Then start loudly enough for the people who whispered to hear. Barlow nodded. Yes, ma'am. It was not full justice, but it was the sound of a door unlocking. Later, Maggie left to organize what she called a dinner and what everyone else understood was a moral referendum with biscuits. Pastor Samuel planned to speak publicly that Sunday. Helen from the bank called Cole and said she would provide a written statement and cooperate with investigators. Walt delivered his account to Maggie, then asked if Ruth liked split pea soup because his wife had made enough to feed a nervous jury. The town was shifting, not gracefully but visibly. People who had hidden behind uncertainty began to test the weight of standing up. That evening, Cole sat alone in the hospital chapel. It was a small room with 6 chairs, a wooden cross battery candles, and a box of tissues placed with grim knowledge. Atlas was not allowed inside at first, until a nurse recognized him as a working dog and said, "Let him pray too if he wants." Atlas entered and immediately lay down in the center aisle facing the door. Cole sat in the back row. He did not know what to say to God. Orders had always been easier than prayers. Finally, he said, "She's a good woman." It sounded inadequate. He tried again. "They are good people." Still too small. He looked at the dog. Atlas blinked. "Fine. Help me not make this about my ghosts." The room did not answer. But the silence did not feel empty. That was new. Maggie found him there 20 minutes later. "Your dog looks holier than you." "He has fewer objections." She sat beside him. For once, she was quiet for a full minute, which Cole suspected required effort. "When my husband died," she said, "Ruth came to the diner every morning for 2 weeks before opening. She washed mugs, said nothing unless I spoke first. One day I asked why she kept coming. She said grief makes simple tasks feel rude and mugs don't mind waiting. I never forgot that." Cole listened. Maggie folded her hands. "I should have fought harder when they accused her. You are now. Late. Earlier is gone." She looked at him. "You steal in Pastor Samuel's lines?" "Maybe." "Good. He owes us." They shared a small smile. Then Maggie's phone buzzed. She read the message and went still. "The diner." Cole stood. "What?" "Someone canceled my lease, effective 30 days. Preston's property manager. Says redevelopment clause." She laughed, but it shook. "Well, there is my price." Cole expected anger. It came, but behind it came something steadier. "What do you want to do?" Maggie looked toward the chapel cross, then at Atlas, then at Cole. "Feed people anyway." The community dinner became larger because of the lease notice, not smaller. By the next day, casseroles arrived at the church. Volunteers shoveled the walkway, and people who had avoided Ruth's name for 3 years began saying it in public, like a debt being paid, a syllable at a time. Cole moved through the fellowship hall, helping set tables, deliberately staying in the background until he realized the background was impossible when accompanied by a large German shepherd being courted by every child and several lonely adults. Atlas tolerated attention with the solemn suffering of royalty. Harold came from the hospital with Ruth's permission, wearing his brown coat and carrying the backpack despite everyone telling him not to. This time it held thank you cards Ruth had written from her hospital bed. "Why the pack?" Cole asked. Harold looked around the hall. "Didn't know who I'd be without it." Cole understood too well. During the dinner, Pastor Samuel stood before the crowd. His voice trembled at first, then strengthened. He admitted he had failed Ruth by trusting influence over conscience. Helen spoke next, then Walt, then Maggie, who announced her lease cancellation and received a standing wave of anger that seemed to surprise her. Cole did not plan to speak, but Ruth had sent a note through Harold. It said, "If you hide forever, people will mistake shadows for humility." He folded it, cursed softly, and walked to the front. Atlas came with him because apparently public speaking required canine supervision. Cole looked at the room full of townspeople, some ashamed, some curious, some ready to help, now that help had become socially permitted.
Harold and Ruth Whitaker once helped a boy who did not know how to ask, he said. His voice sounded rough to his own ears. They did it quietly. That quiet saved my life in ways I only learned this week. Quiet can be holy, but quiet can also become a place where lies grow. Ruth does not need pity. Harold does not need applause. They need truth told in daylight and enough hands willing to carry what one old man should never have had to carry alone. He stopped there. Short, enough. The room was silent. Then Harold from the side muttered loudly, "Still talks too fancy." Laughter broke through the hall, warm and needed. Even Cole smiled.
Then the back doors opened. Preston Vale entered with 2 attorneys and a face arranged into concern. Conversations died. Atlas's tail stopped moving. Preston removed his gloves finger by finger. "I came because this community deserves facts," he said. Cole felt the room tense around Ruth's name. Maggie stepped beside him. Pastor Samuel lifted his chin. Harold set the backpack down at his feet for the first time all evening. Preston smiled gently, as if kindness belonged to him by title. "And facts," he continued, "are often less comforting than stories." Cole looked at Atlas. The dog was already standing. Preston Vale understood rooms the way sailors understand weather. He knew when silence was fear, when it was respect, when it was anger looking for a leader, and when it was simply people waiting for someone else to decide what kind of town they lived in. He stood at the back of the St. Agnes Fellowship Hall, with snow melting on his expensive boots, and 2 attorneys behind him, both carrying leather folders like shields. The community dinner had been noisy 10 seconds before, full of forks, murmured apologies, children sneaking rolls, and Atlas accepting admiration from a retired machinist who smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and peppermint candy. Now every sound had narrowed to the hum of old lights overhead. Cole stood near the front beside Maggie and Pastor Samuel. Harold was halfway down the center aisle, one hand still near the backpack he had finally set on the floor. Ruth was not there. She remained at the hospital, watching by video call on Lena's tablet, wrapped in a heated blanket, and annoyed that the hospice tea tasted like water remembering a leaf. That line had made Harold laugh earlier. He was not laughing now. Preston stepped forward with the pleasant sorrow of a man attending a funeral he had arranged at a discount. "I did not come to disrupt," he said. Maggie muttered, "Then he got lost." A few people heard and shifted, grateful for the pressure valve. Preston continued as if generosity required patience. "I came because misinformation harms communities. Mrs. Whitaker is ill. Mr. Whitaker is overwhelmed. Mr. Mercer is a decorated veteran with understandable emotional ties to them. But emotion does not replace audited records, legal property transfer, or financial fact." Cole kept his face still. Preston wanted him to interrupt. Interruptions would let the attorneys look pained. Preston lifted one folder. The relief fund discrepancy was identified by independent review. The property foreclosure followed documented debt. No one wanted hardship for the Whitakers. My companies have repeatedly offered support, housing, and medical assistance only to be met with suspicion. I ask everyone here to wait for proper authorities rather than indulge a public spectacle. Pastor Samuel took one step forward. His voice trembled less than it had at the start of dinner. Proper authorities are now reviewing evidence that should have been reviewed 3 years ago. Preston inclined his head. And we welcome that. No, Maggie said. You welcome delay. Different casserole. Preston finally looked at her. Ms. Doyle, I understand you are upset about your lease. Business decisions are never personal. The room changed. That sentence did more damage to Preston than any accusation. People knew Maggie. They knew the diner where widowers ate breakfast so someone would ask if they slept. They knew the back booth where teenagers cried over college letters and old men argued about fishing regulations. Business decisions are never personal sounded in that room like saying houses are never homes. Maggie smiled, and Cole knew enough to worry for the target of it. Honey, I have watched you make everything personal, then bill it under development. A ripple moved through the hall. Preston's attorneys whispered. Cole saw Sheriff Barlow enter through the side door, no lights, no drama. He carried a folder and looked like a man who had slept poorly and decided to make it useful. Barlow did not go to Preston. He went to Pastor Samuel. That mattered. Preston noticed. His smile thinned. Sheriff, perhaps you can help calm this? Barlow removed his hat. I am here to hear statements. This is hardly an official forum, no, but a lot of witnesses are in one place, and for once they seem willing to speak. Cole watched Preston's eyes flick toward the exits. Not fear, calculation. Ruth's voice came from the tablet in Harold's hand, small but clear. Preston Vale, if you came to call me confused, do it where I can hear you. The entire hall turned toward Harold, who lifted the tablet with the solemnity of a man raising a lantern. Ruth's face filled the screen, pale but fierce. Her hair was combed, her shawl arranged over the hospital blanket, and Atlas, hearing her voice, stood up as if rank had entered the room. Preston adjusted instantly. Mrs. Whitaker, I am pleased to see you recovering. Do not oil your words for me. I am old, not a hinge. A sound moved through the room, half laugh, half gasp. Ruth continued, You said facts are less comforting than stories. Good. Let us have facts. Fact, I was in the hospital at the time. One account paper says I signed in the church office. Fact, my private notebook was found in a storage unit connected to your project files. Fact, money from a veterans relief fund moved through companies with addresses tied to your holdings. Fact, my husband pushed me through snow because those facts were hidden long enough to take our home. Preston looked at the tablet with controlled sympathy. Those matters are under investigation. You may be misinformed about ownership structures. I kept books for 31 years. Men like you always think structure is fog. It is not. It is shelves. Things sit somewhere. Cole saw Maggie close her eyes in admiration. Barlow stepped forward. Mr. Vale, I need you and your counsel to remain available for formal questioning tomorrow morning. State investigators are arriving by noon. One attorney spoke sharply. Sheriff, my client has not been charged with anything. I did not say charged. I said available. Preston's gaze moved to Cole. This is your doing. Cole shook his head. No, mine would have been less organized. Harold snorted despite himself. Preston's composure held, but only just. You are turning grief into theater, Mr. Mercer. Cole felt the hook in the words, grief, theater, ghosts. He could have answered with anger. He could have brought Danny into the room like a weapon. Instead, he looked at the people seated at folding tables, some ashamed, some newly brave, all of them waiting to see whether calm could be stronger than charm. Ruth asked me not to make it ugly, he said. So I won't. We have documents, witnesses, a recovered notebook, a bank statement, a pastor's statement, Ethan's confession. Let the process work. But no more quiet corners. The phrase seemed to settle, no more quiet corners. Maggie repeated it softly. Then someone near the back said it too. Not a chant, not spectacle, just agreement, moving from mouth to mouth until Preston heard the room, leaving him. The attorneys guided him out before he could spend more dignity. Barlow followed to ensure departure remained orderly. No confrontation, no raised fists, no dramatic collapse, just a powerful man discovering that public politeness had stopped serving him. When the doors closed, the hall remained silent for 3 breaths. Then Harold set the tablet on a table so Ruth could see everyone. He bent, lifted the backpack, and placed it in the center of the hall. This, he said, voice rough, is what we had left yesterday. He opened it carefully, not dumping, not begging, showing. A quilt, medicine, a wedding photograph,
a Bible, socks, a cooking pot, Ruth's prayer can. I carried it because I thought a man was supposed to carry what was his. I was wrong. A town is supposed to carry what is true. He stopped, overwhelmed. Maggie went to him first, then Pastor Samuel, then Walt, the plow driver, Helen from the bank, a widow named Clara who had once received oil money from the fund, a young veteran with a cane, and others. People did not applaud. They came forward and stood near the backpack as if forming a line against erasure. Cole stayed back. Atlas did not. The dog walked to the backpack, sniffed it, then lay down beside it with his head on his paws. That did it. Laughter and tears arrived together, and the room became human again. The next days moved quickly and slowly at once, the way legal storms do. State investigators arrived polite and unsmiling. Aaron Pike came from Boise in a rumpled suit that made him look like a substitute teacher for crimes. He greeted Cole by saying, "You look terrible," then knelt to greet Atlas with genuine respect. "You look promoted." Atlas thumped his tail. Aaron reviewed the documents, interviewed Ruth at the hospital with care, and confirmed that the relief fund had received some federal-linked veteran assistance dollars, which widened the investigation. Ethan gave a full statement. He looked worse each time Cole saw him, as if confession had not freed him yet, but had at least stopped the bleeding inside. He admitted to misleading Ruth, misusing her recorded trust, signing supporting documents, and coordinating with Preston's office to shift funds and property pressure. He insisted he had not wanted physical intimidation and had panicked when security contractors began sending messages. Aaron wrote that phrase down without changing expression. "People who say sending messages usually know the message is ugly," he said later. "We will keep it factual." Helen gave her statement. Walt gave his. Pastor Samuel gave his and wept afterward in the empty sanctuary until Maggie sat beside him and told him tears were acceptable, but self-pity had a 2-minute limit. Barlow turned over emails showing pressure from Preston's legal team and admitted formally that his office had treated Ruth as the easiest answer rather than the most supported one. That admission cost him. It also began to give him back to himself. Preston's defense began immediately. His attorneys challenged chain of custody, questioned Ethan's credibility, suggested Ruth's memory issues made her unreliable, and floated the idea that Cole had manipulated vulnerable elders out of unresolved combat trauma and resentment toward local authority. Cole read the filing at Maggie's diner while Atlas slept beneath the booth. He expected rage. What he felt was a tired clarity. "They'll use Danny," Aaron warned. "If they can access enough, let them try. No! Do not confuse endurance with strategy. We keep you off center stage unless needed. Ruth is the injured party. Documents are the spine. You are not the story." Cole looked at the dog under the table. Atlas opened one eye, approving. "Everybody keeps telling me that. Because for once, everybody is right." At the hospital, Ruth improved enough to sit up longer and issue instructions with renewed force. She insisted on reviewing every public statement. "No words like frail," she told Aaron. "I am temporarily inconvenient." Harold added, "Always been." Ruth threw a napkin at him, which Atlas attempted to intercept in violation of hospital dignity. Lena declared this the best respiratory therapy Ruth had done all day. The mood helped, but pressure remained. Maggie's lease cancellation became public, and customers flooded the diner until she had to create a waiting list for moral support disguised as lunch. Preston's companies sent letters. The letters were legal, cold, and careful. Cole read each one with Aaron and a volunteer attorney named Grace Hollis, a retired judge who had moved to Sandpoint for peace and now seemed delighted to have found paperwork worth biting. "They are trying to isolate each witness," Grace said, tapping a letter with her pen. "So we do the opposite. Consolidate. Formal affidavits. Press only when necessary. No sensational interviews. No emotional bait." Ruth approved. "Good. I have no interest in becoming a sad headline with a wheelchair. The first formal hearing was scheduled for a Monday morning under a sky the color of tin.
It was not a trial, but it would decide whether the foreclosure actions remained frozen, whether the relief fund case reopened fully, and whether Preston's records could be subpoenaed. Ruth attended in person against everyone's preference and with her doctor's reluctant permission. Harold wore his best shirt. Cole wore a dark jacket he had last used at a military funeral. Atlas wore his vest, and after a private negotiation involving Maggie's bacon, all 4 boots. Outside the courthouse, reporters from nearby towns waited, but Grace had prepared one statement, and Ruth read it herself. I ask for truth, not pity. I ask for justice, not revenge. I ask that no one use our pain to entertain themselves. We are here because records were hidden and people were harmed. Let the truth be handled with care. Then she rolled inside, and the cameras lowered as if even they understood. The hearing room smelled of varnish, wet coats, and old arguments. Preston sat with his attorneys, composed as ever. Ethan sat on the other side, pale, cooperating under counsel. Barlow sat behind the state investigators. Maggie, Pastor, Samuel, Helen, Walt, Lena, and half the town filled the benches. Cole sat behind Ruth and Harold, with Atlas at his feet. The proceedings began slowly. Documents entered, dates were compared, hospital records contradicted signatures, bank procedures were questioned. Ruth answered clearly when asked what she remembered, and just as clearly when asked what she did not. That honesty strengthened her. Ethan confirmed his role and named Preston's project finance staff. Then Preston's attorney rose and turned toward Cole. Mr. Mercer, you inserted yourself into this matter after a chance encounter, correct? Cole stood. Yes. You are not a lawyer, accountant, or law enforcement officer, correct? You are a former Navy SEAL with documented trauma from combat service, Grace objected calmly. The hearing officer allowed limited questioning only as it related to evidence handling. The attorney smiled with professional regret. Is it possible, Mr. Mercer, that your emotional debt to the Whitakers led you to interpret ambiguous events as conspiracy? Cole felt the room focus on him. Atlas pressed against his boot. The cracked watch sat in Cole's pocket, heavy as a stone. He answered slowly. Yes, it is possible for emotion to affect judgment. That is why I photographed evidence, preserved documents, involved law enforcement, contacted financial investigators, and asked witnesses to speak for themselves. My feelings started the search. They are not the evidence. Aaron looked down to hide a smile. Grace's pen stopped. Ruth's shoulders eased. The attorney tried twice more and gained nothing. By late afternoon, the hearing officer ordered the foreclosure frozen, the fund investigation expanded, and subpoenas issued for records tied to Vail Mountain Holdings and related entities. It was not victory. It was permission for truth to keep walking. Outside, the town exhaled into the cold. Harold gripped Cole's shoulder, not saying thank you because the words were too small. Ruth looked at the courthouse steps, then at the snowy street beyond. We are not home yet, she said. Cole nodded. No. Atlas sneezed, shook snow from his boots, and leaned against her chair. Ruth smiled. But we are no longer on the road. That night, Cole returned to the cabin exhausted and found Maggie had left a pot of stew on the stove with a note, "Eat before hero nonsense occurs." He ate. He slept for 4 hours straight. At 2:17 he woke, as always, but this time Atlas did not need to come find him. Cole was already breathing. Outside, snow fell lightly, not erasing tracks, only softening them. The subpoenas did what rumors could not. They entered offices where charm had been enough, opened drawers that smiles had kept closed, and asked numbers to explain themselves without respect for social standing. For 2 weeks, Sandpoint lived under a quiet pressure. Nothing exploded. No one shouted in the streets.
The lake remained frozen at the edges, the diner served eggs, the church bell rang on Sunday, and yet everyone could feel something moving beneath the surface, like spring water under ice. Cole spent those weeks doing the hardest thing for him, staying useful without taking over. Grace Hollis, the retired judge turned volunteer attorney, made that rule explicit on a yellow legal pad she taped above Maggie's diner office desk, which had become the unofficial evidence annex. Rule 1. Ruth leads. Rule 2. Documents speak. Rule 3. Cole does not glare at people until after they finish answering. Maggie added Rule 4. Atlas may glare as needed.
Atlas accepted this authority with mature restraint and immediately glared at the refrigerator until someone gave him a piece of turkey. Ruth moved from hospital to a short rehabilitation stay, then finally back to Cole's cabin, while the Whitaker house remained under legal freeze and safety review. She hated the walker Lena insisted she use for short distances, calling it furniture with opinions, but she used it. Harold learned to ask for help with transfers, though the words came out stiff as frozen rope. Cole noticed because he knew the taste of those words. Help me. Every language made them heavy. One evening, while Harold practiced folding the wheelchair and unfolding it again, he said, without looking up, "I keep thinking if I had read those papers better, Ruth wouldn't have lost 3 years." Cole sanded a rough edge on a porch board he was repairing. "If I had answered letters, maybe my father wouldn't have died alone." Harold looked at him sharply. Cole shrugged. "Bad math." We both do it. Harold sat with that. "You ever stop ask me in 10 years?" the old man huffed. "Not a comforting counselor." "You want comforting, ask Ruth. You want accurate, ask Atlas." The dog, lying belly up near the stove with one boot in his mouth, did not look accurate, but nobody challenged him. The investigation widened. Aaron found that Northridge Consulting had no real staff. Clearwater Hospitality Services shared a mailing address with a Vail Mountain subsidiary, and several payments from the Veterans Relief Fund had been described as community transition services, tied to relocation assistance that no veteran had received. Preston's finance director claimed the entries were clerical errors. Ethan contradicted him. Then the finance director resigned and hired his own attorney, which Grace described as a rat leaving a ship after checking whether the lifeboat has snacks. The line delighted Maggie so much she wrote it on the specials board, then erased it when Pastor Samuel raised an eyebrow. But Preston was not finished. His attorneys filed a motion accusing Ethan of acting independently and using valet entities without authorization. They argued that Preston's development group had been defrauded too. It was a clever move to turn the mastermind into another victim, push blame onto the weaker accomplice, and make Ruth's suffering an unfortunate byproduct of employee misconduct. Ethan panicked. He called Cole from the safe room above the diner where he had been staying under informal watch. His voice shook. "They're going to pin it all on me." "Did you expect loyalty?" Cole asked. "No. Maybe. I don't know. I expected them to protect themselves less efficiently." "Do you have more?" A long pause. "Maybe. Ethan, I kept recordings. Not many. Calls with Preston. I started after he made the 217 joke. It scared me how much he knew about you. I thought if he researched a stranger that deeply, he had probably researched everyone." "Where are they? That is the problem." Cole closed his eyes. "Of course. I put them in a cloud account. My password manager is on my laptop. Preston's people have the laptop. How? I left it in my office the night after we met at the boat launch. Next morning it was gone. I did not report it because reporting it required explaining the recordings." Cole looked at Atlas. The dog looked back with the grave disappointment of command reviewing paperwork. "Tell Aaron. He'll think I'm useless. He already thinks that. This may upgrade you to recoverable." Ethan gave a cracked laugh. "You are terrible at comfort. I have references." Aaron took the laptop issue seriously. Digital investigators traced access attempts to Ethan's cloud account. Most failed.
One succeeded from an IP address associated with a Vale mountain contractor. That was enough for another warrant. This time law enforcement moved through official channels.
No midnight storage units. No dramatic discoveries under flickering lights. Just offices, drives, email servers, logs. Boring. Beautifully boring. Evidence likes boring. While investigators worked, Preston attempted another kind of pressure. He visited Ruth at the cabin with Grace present, claiming he wanted to apologize personally. Cole refused to leave the room, but stood by the kitchen counter and said nothing. Preston brought flowers. Ruth looked at them. "Are those from the resort florist?" "From town," he said. "Then you supported local business once." "Good." Grace covered a cough. Preston sat across from Ruth, hands folded. "Mrs. Whitaker, I regret deeply that you have suffered. Whatever mistakes were made by employees or associates, you deserved better." Ruth studied him. "That is a sentence designed to walk around a room without touching furniture. I am trying to express compassion." "No. You are trying to express liability management." Harold made a choking sound that might have been pride. Preston's eyes hardened for half a second. "If this proceeds, it will be painful. Public. Your health is fragile, your husband's too. I can still ensure your home is restored, your medical bills covered, your reputation repaired. Can you repair it without truth? There are many forms of resolution. Only one form of truth." Preston leaned forward. "And if truth destroys more than it heals," Ruth's face softened unexpectedly. "That is what guilty men ask when consequences finally learn their address." Cole looked down, because if he looked at Preston, he might enjoy the moment too much. Atlas did it for him, staring with calm professional disdain. Preston left the flowers. Ruth asked Cole to give them to the nurses at the clinic. "Beauty need not be wasted because the giver is slippery," she said. That line stayed with Cole. He began writing some of Ruth's sentences in a small notebook, partly for memory, partly because he suspected she was building a better vocabulary for survival than any field manual he had read. The decisive turn came from Patricia Vale Preston's younger sister, though. At first, Cole knew her only as a woman sitting alone in the diner booth farthest from the door. She was 52, dressed plainly with dark hair pinned back and a face that looked tired of family money. Maggie called Cole and said, "There is a woman here asking for Ruth. She has Vale eyes but not Vale shoes." Cole arrived with Atlas and found Patricia stirring untouched coffee. She stood when he approached. "Mr. Mercer, I am Patricia Vale. Preston is my brother." Atlas sniffed once and did not object. That was not endorsement, but it was interesting. Patricia looked at the dog. "He is very direct. He has no shareholders." A small smile came and went. "I have records. Not all." Enough to show Preston knew the relief fund transfers were improper, and that Ethan was being used as the local signature. Cole sat. "Why come now?" She looked toward the window where snow melt slid down the glass in crooked lines. "Because Ruth Whitaker sent flowers to the clinic." Cole waited. Patricia's eyes filled. "My mother spent her last month there. Ruth sat with her once when I was delayed by a road closure. She did not know us well. She just saw an old woman alone and stayed. My brother called it sentimental inefficiency when I told him." Her jaw tightened. "I have excused Preston for years because families train you to call cruelty ambition if it pays for dinner. But watching him do this to Ruth and then use her health as leverage?" She shook her head. "I am done." Maggie appeared with pie none of them ordered and placed it between them. "Truth requires sugar." Patricia gave a wet laugh. She handed Cole a sealed envelope and a small drive. "I also have emails. He will say I misunderstood. He will say I am bitter. He may be right about bitter, not about this." Aaron and Grace verified enough within hours to know Patricia mattered. Her records included an internal email from Preston referencing the Whitaker obstacle, Ruth's compromised credibility, and accelerated acquisition before public sympathy shifts. Another message joked about community memory lasting only until the next ribbon cutting. The language was cold, not cinematic, and that made it damning. Cruelty in business emails often wears comfortable shoes. Patricia agreed to testify. Preston's attorneys moved to discredit her before she even sat down, hinting at family disputes and inheritance resentment. She expected it. "My brother has called me emotional since I was 9, she told Ruth during a cabin visit arranged quietly. "It used to silence me. Now it sounds like proof I still have working parts." Ruth reached for her hand. "Working parts are underrated."
Harold offered coffee. Patricia took one sip and blinked. "This is terrible." Harold beamed. "Family recipe." "For what, surrender?" Ruth laughed so hard Lena threatened to check her oxygen. Humor threaded through fear again, not erasing it, stitching it. The second hearing was scheduled after investigators reviewed Patricia's materials and digital logs from the seized systems. This time, the courthouse steps were packed, but the tone remained restrained because Ruth had asked for dignity, and somehow the town had decided obeying Ruth was easier than disappointing Atlas. Grace presented new evidence. Aaron explained the financial pathways in plain language donations meant for veterans, moved through shell vendors, then into accounts benefiting resort acquisition and pressure campaigns. Ethan testified to his role. He did not ask forgiveness, he answered. Patricia testified next. She spoke without theatrics, describing meetings, emails, and the way Preston viewed elderly homeowners as friction. Preston sat still, face controlled, but his fingers pressed white around a pen. His attorney tried to suggest Patricia hated her brother. Patricia looked at him. "I love who he might have been. I am testifying about what he did." The hearing room went silent. Ruth closed her eyes. Harold held her hand. Cole felt Atlas shift at his feet. Then Sheriff Barlow took the stand. His testimony was not heroic. It was uncomfortable, halting, full of admissions that made him look weak. He acknowledged pressure from Preston's office, failure to pursue alternate suspects, and his decision to treat Ruth's illness as convenient doubt rather than reason for care. "Why come forward now?" Grace asked. Barlow looked at Ruth. "Because she asked for truth, not revenge. I can still give one of those." That was the moment Cole saw the town change, not in applause but in posture. People sat straighter. Shame had become action, and action, once begun, is harder to fold away. By late afternoon, the hearing officer referred the matter for criminal proceedings against Preston Vale, his finance director, and associated contractors. The foreclosure remained frozen. Ruth's name in the official language was no longer tied to presumed wrongdoing. Full exoneration would require final orders, but the public lie had cracked beyond repair. Outside reporters asked for comments. Ruth faced them from her wheelchair. Harold beside her, Cole behind Atlas at her feet. "I am grateful," she said, "but I am also tired. Please remember that old people are not symbols before they are people. We need supper, medicine, quiet, and justice in that order." The clip spread online not because it was shocking, but because it was true. That night back at the cabin, Harold hung the backpack on a peg by the door, not on his shoulders, on the wall. He stood looking at it for a long time. Cole joined him. "Feels strange," Harold said. "Letting it hang. You can take it down if needed." "I know. That's the strange part." Ruth called from the living room. "If either of you start becoming profound in the hallway, bring me tea first." Harold wiped his eyes quickly. "Bossy woman." "A live woman," she corrected. Cole made tea. Atlas carried one of his boots into the room and dropped it in Ruth's lap like tribute. She held it up. "Is this a gift or a complaint?" Cole said. With him, yes. They laughed. Outside, snow began melting from the roof in slow drops. For the first time, the sound did not remind Cole of a clock stuck at 2:17. It sounded like thaw.
Spring did not arrive all at once in northern Idaho. It negotiated. A morning of meltwater would be followed by a night hard enough to freeze every footprint into a small fossil. The lake opened first along the edges, dark water showing through like truth under a tired story. The pines dropped snow in sudden soft crashes. Mud appeared with no manners. Atlas discovered mud with professional enthusiasm and had to be toweled at the cabin door while Ruth supervised from her chair like a judge overseeing a repeat offender. "He looks sorry," Harold said. "He looks strategic," Cole replied, holding one large paw. Atlas leaned into the towel and avoided eye contact. The legal process continued in layers. Preston Vale was formally charged with financial fraud-related offenses, witness intimidation, and conspiracy tied to the diversion of relief funds and property pressure. The finance director entered negotiations. Contractors began remembering instructions they had previously forgotten. Ethan pleaded to his part and agreed to continued cooperation. Nothing about it felt clean. Justice Cole learned did not come like sunlight in hymns. It came like men hauling wet carpet out of a flooded basement, necessary, heavy, smelling worse before the room improved. Ruth understood this better than anyone. She insisted on attending key proceedings when her health allowed and staying home when Lena said enough. "Courage is not a doctor's note," Lena told her. Ruth replied, "No, but neither is bossiness." Lena said, "Mine is medically supported." Harold enjoyed these exchanges immensely, unless they turned on him. Maggie's diner lease fight became its own front. Once Preston's influence weakened, the redevelopment clause looked less invincible. Customers signed statements about the diner's community value. A local credit union offered financing. Patricia Vale, newly separated from her brother's business, quietly helped identify a path for Maggie to buy the building with community investment. Maggie hated accepting help, until Ruth called and said, "Do not confuse independence with refusing good tools." Maggie bought the building on a rainy Thursday and put a sign in the window, "Same pie, less landlord." The town celebrated by ordering too much pie. Pastor Samuel began rebuilding the Veterans Relief Fund with stricter oversight, 3 signers independent review, and no one allowed to say, "We trust each other," as a substitute for receipts. Helen from the bank volunteered to train the committee. Walt plowed Ruth and Harold's road for free until Harold threatened to pay him in unsolicited carpentry advice, which proved effective. Barlow faced review for his failures, and though some wanted him gone immediately, Ruth wrote a letter saying accountability should be clear but not hungry. "A man who admits cowardice can become useful," she wrote. "A town that only throws him away may learn nothing except disposal." Cole read the letter twice. Then he folded it and put it in the notebook where he had begun collecting Ruth's sentences. Grace saw him do it and said, "Planning to publish?" "No." "Good. She would edit you without mercy." Ruth and Harold's house was released back to them under court order, pending final restitution. The first visit nearly undid Harold. Cole drove them there in the pickup, Atlas riding in the back seat between Ruth and a box of cleaning supplies Maggie had packed with military abundance. The house looked smaller after everything: blue siding, faded porch rail, loose survey flags removed, but their small holes still visible in the thawing ground. Harold stood at the bottom of the steps and did not move. Ruth reached for his hand. "It waited," she said. Harold shook his head. "Barely. So did we." They went room by room. The kitchen still held the 2 monks. The sewing room smelled cold but familiar. Ruth touched the table, the chair, the tomato pincushion, and finally sat by the window where she used to sew. "I thought I had said goodbye to this light," she whispered. Cole and Maggie looked away. Atlas did not. Atlas laid his head on her knee because dogs have no foolish respect for private tears. The repairs began the following week. Not dramatic renovations meant to erase hardship, but careful restoration. Roof checked, ramp rebuilt, wiring fixed, plumbing updated. The porch Harold had made decades before was reinforced, not replaced because Harold said old wood deserved a chance if rot had not reached the heart. Cole worked beside him when allowed, following instructions from a man who could still spot a crooked board at 20 feet. Their conversations changed while they worked. At first they spoke of measurements, nails, weather. Then Caleb. Then Danny. Harold never pushed. He had the carpenter's instinct for pressure too much. And the piece splits too little, and nothing holds. One afternoon while they replaced a porch step, Harold said, "Your father came to me after you enlisted. Said he was proud and scared and too stupid to tell you either." Cole held the board steady. "He never wrote." "He did. Tore them up mostly. I found pieces once in his stove." Cole looked toward the lake. "I thought he didn't care." "He cared badly." The phrase settled between them. Cared badly. It did not excuse. It did not condemn. It named. Cole found naming more useful than he expected. At night, back at the cabin, he began sleeping in the bed instead of the chair. Not every night. Some nights the old hour took him by the throat, and Atlas had to climb half onto him with no regard for ribs or dignity. But other nights he woke, saw the dark rafters, heard snow melt or rain, and remained in Idaho. Lena noticed. She also noticed he had not put the cabin back on the market. "Interesting," she said over coffee. "Observation is not diagnosis," Cole replied. "No, but it annoys you similarly." Ruth noticed too. "Houses don't like being empty," she reminded him. "You said that." "I am old. Repetition is one of my remaining sports." Cole began to understand that the cabin had not been asking him to live in the past. It had been waiting to become useful. The idea came from Harold's backpack hanging by the door and Ruth's prayer can on the restored windowsill. It came from Maggie's diner full of people who had nowhere else to be heard. It came from the young veteran with a cane who approached Cole after church and admitted he sometimes slept in his truck rather than tell his mother he was not managing. It came from Atlas, who positioned himself between every hurting person and the nearest exit, as if blocking retreat were his final career. Cole spoke to Ruth and Harold first. "I want to turn the cabin into temporary winter housing," he said. "For veterans, elders, people stuck between paperwork and survival. Short stays, warm bed, food, help connecting services, not charity. Logistics." Ruth's eyes shone. "There is that word wearing a better coat." Harold rubbed his jaw. "Cabin needs work." "I know a carpenter." "Expensive." "I can pay in terrible coffee." "Then you cannot afford me." They built it anyway. Grace helped with the nonprofit paperwork. Pastor Samuel linked the relief fund under new safeguards. Maggie organized food volunteers and threatened anyone who called it a shelter with a ladle. "It is a house," she insisted. "Shelter is what you do. House is what people feel." Patricia donated office furniture from one of Preston's closed project sites and insisted her name stay off the plaque. Ethan, awaiting sentencing, wrote a letter to Ruth. She read it alone, then aloud to Harold, then placed it in the prayer can. Cole did not ask what it said. Forgiveness, he was learning, was not public property. Preston's trial began in early May. By then the snow had retreated to shaded ditches and the mountains wore white only at the highest ridges. The proceedings were longer and more technical than any outsider expected. Numbers, emails, authorizations, recorded calls, property maps. No single moment cracked the case. It was accumulation.
Ruth testified for nearly 3 hours over 2 sessions, her voice steady, her humor appearing exactly when the room needed to remember she was more than harm done to her. "Mrs. Whitaker," Preston's attorney asked, "is it possible your memory after the stroke caused confusion about these documents?" Ruth answered, "Yes. That is why honest people should have protected me from complicated papers, not used my trust as a ladder." The jury heard Ethan, Patricia, Helen, Pastor Samuel, Barlow, Aaron. Grace's strategy kept Cole's testimony narrow: chain of custody, discovery, preservation, the first road encounter.
But when asked why he stopped for Harold and Ruth that day, he paused. The courtroom waited. "My dog told me to," he said. A low laugh moved through the benches. Atlas, lying at Ruth's feet with permission from the court, opened one eye as if to say accuracy mattered. Then Cole added, "And because I recognized people who had once stopped for me." That was enough. Near the end of trial, Preston chose not to testify. His attorneys argued complexity, delegation, reasonable doubt, and Ethan's unreliability. The prosecutors argued pattern, motive concealment, and pressure. The jury deliberated into evening. Everyone waited in the hallway under lights too bright for human nerves. Harold held Ruth's hand. Maggie paced. Pastor Samuel prayed quietly. Patricia sat alone until Ruth called her over. Barlow stood near a window, not forgiven by everyone but present. Cole sat on the floor because the benches were full. Atlas beside him. "You okay?" Aaron asked, lowering himself with a groan. "You are getting old," Cole said. "I investigate fraud now. It ages the soul." Cole looked at the cracked watch in his palm. 2:17, always 2:17. "I thought if this ended, something in me would too." Aaron nodded. "And? It doesn't work that way." "No. But maybe it moves." Aaron smiled faintly. "That is annoyingly healthy." The jury returned at 7:43 p.m. The verdict found Preston guilty on the central charges tied to fraud and conspiracy, with additional findings related to intimidation handled through separate sentencing considerations. The finance director's negotiated plea stood. Ethan's cooperation would be considered. Restitution hearings were ordered for the Whitakers, the Veterans Relief Fund, Maggie's lease damages, and affected property owners. No one cheered in the courtroom. Ruth had asked them not to. Harold bowed his head. Maggie cried without pretending it was allergies. Patricia covered her face. Preston remained still, then was escorted through the legal process with no spectacle. Cole watched Ruth. She did not look triumphant. She looked relieved and terribly tired. Outside, reporters waited. Ruth gave one statement. "My name is clean. That matters. But I hope what stays with people is not what was done to us. I hope they remember how many chances there were to do right sooner." Then she asked Harold to take her home. Not the cabin. Home. The Whitaker house glowed with lamplight when they arrived. Volunteers had finished the ramp. A pot of soup waited on the stove labeled by Maggie with reheating instructions and insults. Ruth's prayer can sat on the windowsill. Harold's backpack hung by the door, empty now except for one folded blanket and a small card that read, "In case pride forgets it has neighbors." Cole carried Ruth inside, not because she could not be wheeled, but because Harold asked him quietly on the porch, "Help me give her threshold back." Cole did. Ruth touched the doorframe as she entered and whispered, "Thank you." To God, to the house, to everyone, maybe all at once. Atlas inspected every room, approved the kitchen, questioned the absence of bacon, and finally settled at Ruth's feet. Later, Cole stood on the porch, alone. The lake shone under moonlight. Behind him came Harold's low voice, Ruth's laugh, Maggie opening cabinets, Lena telling someone to sit down, Pastor Samuel reciting a blessing over soup before Maggie accused him of letting it get cold. Cole took out Danny's watch. For years, he had treated it like a sentence. He had carried it into grocery stores, courtrooms, motel rooms, and his father's cabin, as if grief might accuse him of betrayal if it ever left his skin. But the watch had never asked to be a prison. It had belonged to a friend who loved bad jokes, breakfast food, and calling his wife from any place a signal could be borrowed from the sky. Danny would have hated being turned into a locked room. Cole knew that suddenly with a certainty so plain it almost made him laugh. Now slowly he set it on the porch rail, not leaving it, not discarding it, letting it rest somewhere outside his pocket. Atlas came out and sat beside him. "We still wake up tomorrow," Cole said. The dog leaned into his leg. "Yeah, I know." The watch remained at 2:17, but around it night moved on. By June, the ridge above Sandpoint had turned green so intensely it almost looked apologetic for winter. Wildflowers appeared along the road where Cole had first seen wheelchair tracks, yellow and purple against the ditch grass. The lake opened wide and blue, holding the sky without effort. Tourists returned with kayaks on car roofs and sunglasses on dashboards, unaware that a few months earlier, the town had stood at a quieter kind of crossroads beneath snow. Cole noticed the place every time he drove past. Atlas noticed too. The German shepherd would lift his head, ears forward, and look toward the shoulder where Harold had pushed Ruth through white weather with a life strapped to his back. Cole never turned it into a shrine. Ruth would have objected to the sentimentality, and Harold would have asked who planned to mow it. But Cole slowed there. Slowing was allowed. Some places deserved the courtesy of not being passed too quickly. The Whitaker house smelled of sawdust, lemon oil, and Ruth's tea again. The porch held. The ramp was solid. The sewing room had been warmed, cleaned, and returned to its rightful chaos of thread fabric pins and little notes only Ruth understood. Harold spent mornings in his shop, repairing chairs for neighbors who suddenly discovered broken furniture after realizing he would accept paid work more easily than compliments. Ruth returned to the Relief Fund board under a new title she invented herself: Keeper of Uncomfortable Questions. No check moved without 3 signatures. No vendor was approved without verification. No meeting ended until someone asked, "What would this look like to the person with the least power?" Pastor Samuel wrote the question at the top of every agenda. Helen Price became treasurer and never again treated hesitation as enough. Walt Kinney plowed and patched, and when needed testified at civic meetings with the blunt charm of a man who had finally learned that fear spoken aloud loses some of its rent. Sheriff Barlow kept his job after review, but under oversight, community pressure, and the permanent discomfort of having Ruth Whitaker pray for him by name. "Prayer is not always soft," she told Cole. "Sometimes it is a lamp pointed at a mess." Maggie bought the diner building and painted the back door red because her late husband had always wanted to. On the first morning after the sale closed, she served free pie to anyone who had signed a support letter and full-price pie to anyone who had waited until victory to be brave. "Grace requires boundaries," she said, holding a coffee pot like a scepter. The sign, "Same Pie, Less Landlord," became a local photograph favorite. Maggie pretended to hate the attention and then rearranged the flowers under it twice a day. Patricia Vale stayed in town longer than anyone expected. She sold her shares tied to Preston's companies, established a restitution support fund anonymously until everyone guessed it, and spent one afternoon at Ruth's sewing table learning how to mend a torn coat lining. "I am not good at this," Patricia said, pricking her finger and looking personally betrayed by the needle. Ruth said, "Good. Skills that humble us are cheaper than therapy." Ethan received a reduced sentence because of his cooperation, but reduction did not mean escape. He wrote letters. Some Ruth answered, some she did not. Harold read none of them unless invited. "Forgiveness is Ruth's room," he told Cole. "I don't barge in." That sentence made it into Cole's notebook. Preston's sentencing came with restitution orders and a public record that could not be polished into misunderstanding. His resort project collapsed under legal and financial scrutiny. Some people worried the town would lose jobs.
Then others began imagining different work, smaller contracts, local repairs, a veterans housing partnership, trail maintenance, winter transport services for elders.
A community land trust Grace had apparently been dreaming of since 1997 and waiting for an excuse to unleash. Greed had promised prosperity as a tower. The town began building it like a table instead, with more legs. Cole's cabin became the 217 house in late June. Ruth disliked the name at first. "It sounds like a horror movie or a bus schedule," she said. Cole explained reluctantly about Danny's watch and the minute that had held him for years. Ruth listened without interrupting. Harold listened too, his hands folded over his cane. Atlas slept at Cole's feet, but woke whenever Cole's voice changed. When Cole finished, Ruth nodded slowly. "Then the name stays if it means time does not get the last word." The first sign was carved by Harold from cedar salvaged from the old porch. The letters were plain: the 217 house. Temporary winter rest. Veterans, elders, neighbors. Maggie complained that neighbors included everyone, and therefore was poor branding. Ruth said that was precisely the point. The house opened with no ribbon cutting because Ruth said scissors near ceremony made people foolish. Instead, they held supper. Long tables on the lawn, fried chicken from the diner, potato salad from 3 competing church ladies who kept pretending not to judge one another. Lemon cake. Coffee better than Caleb's by legal mandate. Atlas wore a blue bandana and tolerated photographs until a little girl tried to crown him with daisies, at which point he retreated behind Harold with tactical efficiency. Harold fed him bacon when Ruth was not looking. Ruth was looking. She allowed it because mercy has small loopholes. Cole stood near the porch watching people move through the yard. The young veteran with the cane sat with Aaron Pike, who had driven up from Boise and immediately been recruited to move tables. Lena ran a blood pressure booth despite insisting she was off duty. Grace argued land trust bylaws with Pastor Samuel over pie. Barlow directed parking with humility visible from space. Maggie commanded the food line. Ruth sat under a maple tree with Patricia on one side and Harold on the other, receiving visitors not like a victim restored, but like a queen who had survived bad weather and expected her subjects to bring better casserole next time. Cole should have felt crowded. Instead, he felt held at a distance that did not trap him. That was new. He walked to the porch rail where Danny's watch now rested in a small wooden box behind glass, not displayed as tragedy, but placed beside a card that read, "For those who wake at the hour life changed, stay until morning." The wording had been Ruth's. Of course it had. Cole touched the glass once. Atlas came beside him, gray at the muzzle, eyes bright. "You did good," Cole said. Atlas leaned against his leg and belched softly. "Inspirational as always." "Talking to your dog again?" Lena asked, appearing with 2 plates. "He gives concise feedback." He gives gas and judgment.
"Both useful." She handed him a plate. "You look almost peaceful. Should I be concerned?" Cole looked across the yard. Harold was telling a group of teenagers how to build a ramp correctly, using a dinner roll as a level. Ruth caught Cole watching and lifted her tea glass. Maggie yelled at someone not to put a serving spoon in the coleslaw and the beans because civilization had rules. The lake flashed blue beyond the trees. "Maybe a little concerned," he said. Lena smiled. "Good. Peace should feel strange at first." Later, as sunset turned the ridge gold, Ruth asked Cole to drive her to the road where they had met. Harold came too, pretending he had no interest in ceremonial nonsense while wearing his best hat. Atlas took the back seat with his head between them. They stopped at the shoulder where the snow had been. In June, it was only gravel grass and the faint dip where winter runoff had carved a line. Ruth sat quietly in her wheelchair. Harold stood behind her, hands on the grips but not leaning. Cole stood a few feet away. For a while, no one spoke. The evening smelled of warm pine and lake water. Finally, Ruth said, "I was so angry that day." Harold looked down. At me, at God, at the road, at my own legs, at that backpack, at you for breathing so hard and pretending you weren't. Harold smiled sadly. I was angry at the wheels. Wheels are innocent, not those. Cole looked at the road. I almost didn't stop. Ruth turned to him, but Atlas did, yes. The dog, hearing his name, wagged once. Ruth reached down and touched his head. Sometimes grace has paws. Harold cleared his throat. And terrible boots. Cole laughed. It came easily now, not always, but often enough to trust. Ruth looked at him. What will you do with the cabin when winter comes? Keep it open. And when memories come, same answer. She nodded, satisfied.
Harold reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He handed it to Cole. Inside was a brass key, old and worn. Shop key, Harold said. For our place, if you need tools or coffee that can remove paint. Cole held it carefully. You sure? No, but Ruth is. Ruth smiled. Keys are just metal until trust makes them heavy. Cole put the key on his ring beside the cabin key. The sound they made together was small and bright. Months passed. The 217 house served its first guest in October, a widow whose furnace failed during an early cold snap. Then a veteran waiting on benefits, then an elderly brother and sister whose road washed out. Each stay was temporary, practical, and private. No videos, no sad photographs, no one turned suffering into proof of anyone else's goodness. Maggie delivered food. Pastor Samuel coordinated volunteers. Lena checked medications. Harold repaired whatever people broke and complained happily. Ruth kept the prayer can on the windowsill of the 217 house, now labeled Requests, Gratitude, Complaints God Can Handle. Atlas appointed himself intake officer and greeted each guest by sniffing luggage and sitting on the feet of whoever trembled most. Cole learned to sleep in the cabin even when guests were there. Not perfectly. Some nights he still woke at 217 with the old terror blooming in his chest. But now the house had sounds around him. A kettle, Atlas breathing wind in pines, someone turning a page in the next room, life continuing without asking his permission. One December night, nearly a year after the storm, Cole woke at the old hour and found Harold in the kitchen making coffee. This is trespassing, Cole said, voice rough. Harold poured 2 mugs. Your key works both ways. That is not how keys work. Mine does. They sat at the table while snow began to fall outside, light at first. Atlas slept under Ruth's prayer can, paws twitching. Harold pushed 1 mug toward Cole. It was terrible. Cole drank it anyway. Ruth sleeping, like a woman who ordered the moon to stay put and expects compliance. Harold looked toward the window. I hated needing you that day. I know. Still do some mornings. I know that too. The old man nodded. But I am grateful. Those can share a chair, turns out. Cole looked at the falling snow. I hated being needed. Still do. Some mornings. Harold smiled. Then we are both improving slowly enough to remain ourselves. They sat in comfortable silence. At 2:18, Cole noticed the minute had passed. Nothing dramatic happened. No heavenly light, no sudden healing. Just the next minute arriving because that is what minutes do when a man lets them. He looked at Atlas, then at Harold, then at the prayer can. Ruth awake. Harold sipped coffee. Probably. She hears character development from 2 rooms away. From the hallway came Ruth's voice, sleepy and sharp. I heard that. Harold Whitaker. Harold winked at Cole. Atlas opened one eye. The snow outside thickened, softening the road, but not erasing it. Somewhere beneath the white lay the tracks from a wheelchair, a backpack, a pickup, and a dog who refused to ignore what mattered. In time, people in Sandpoint told the story many ways. The story of the retired SEAL who came home to sell a cabin and found a purpose. The story of the old couple who lost their house and won back their name. The story of the diner owner who bought her building. The story of a town that learned courage late, but not too late. The story of a German shepherd who hated boots and understood grace better than most humans. Cole never corrected the versions unless they made him sound too noble. Ruth corrected those aggressively. "He stopped because the dog insisted," she would say. Give credit where credit is due. Atlas, old and dignified, accepted this truth with a thump of his tail. And every winter, when snow began to cover the ridge road again, the porch light at the 217 house stayed on. Not bright enough to erase the dark, just bright enough for someone carrying too much to see where to stop. Some stories remind us that God often sends help quietly through a neighbor, a warm room, a faithful dog, or one person who finally decides not to keep driving. Ruth and Harold's journey teaches us that dignity matters, truth matters, and no one should have to carry winter alone. If this story touched your heart, write Amen in the comments and share it with someone who may need courage today. May we notice the people on the road before the snow covers their tracks. May we ask better questions, offer help without pride, and accept help without shame. And may every heavy backpack become lighter because loving hands are willing to lift it together.